Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer. In 1974, the Green Bay Packers used their 17th round draft pick on a wide receiver out of Portland State named Randall Woodfield. He was tall, athletic, and had just wrapped up a productive college career. Green Bay brought him to training camp, gave him a look, and then cut him before the regular season. What they didn't know was that they had just sent home a future serial killer. After football, Woodfield began a violent crime spree along the West Coast that would stretch across multiple years. Initially responsible for a string of robberies and assaults, his crimes escalated quickly. By the late 1970s, he was dubbed the I-5 killer, targeting victims in cities along the Interstate 5 corridor, from California to Washington. Authorities eventually linked Woodfield to as many as 44 murders. He was convicted of one in 1981 and sentenced to life in prison, but he is suspected in dozens more. The number remains disputed, but his trail left behind one of the largest and most disturbing victim lists associated with any American criminal. Today, he's serving multiple life sentences in Oregon. His name rarely comes up in football history, but he remains, without question, the darkest individual ever to be drafted into the NFL. Chuck Hughes' only in-game fatality. On October 24th, 1971, during a late-season matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Chicago Bears, 28-year-old wide receiver Chuck Hughes lined up for what would be the final play of his life. With just over a minute remaining in the game, Hughes collapsed to the turf between plays. At first, players thought he was faking or cramping. Then, they saw him convulsing. The Lions team doctor and a Bears team physician rushed onto the field. So did an ambulance. As medics worked on him in front of 54,000 fans, players from both teams dropped to one knee. The stadium fell silent. His teammates stood around him in shock, praying. The image of Bears linebacker Dick Butkus waving frantically for help over Hughes' body remains one of the most haunting sights in NFL history. Hughes was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The cause: a heart attack brought on by undiagnosed arteriosclerosis. His left coronary artery was 75% blocked. Amazingly, and almost unthinkably by today's standards, the game resumed after Hughes was taken off the field. The final minute was played out as though nothing had happened. To this day, Chuck Hughes is the only NFL player to die on the field during a game. The Lions retired his number, 85, and honored him privately, but the moment remains a grim outlier in league history. Jaguars Axe Incident, 2003. When Jack Del Rio took over as head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2003, he wanted to build a culture of toughness and perseverance. As part of that, he introduced a motivational prop in the locker room, a tree stump, and a real wood-cutting axe. The slogan was simple: keep chopping wood. Players were encouraged to take swings at the stump as a symbolic reminder to stay focused and persistent. Then, it backfired, literally. Punter Chris Hansen, participating in the team's new tradition, took a swing at the stump, missed, and drove the blade into his own leg. The injury was severe enough to require surgery and ended his season. For a team already struggling, losing a punter in a non-football accident was as surreal as it was preventable. The axe was removed from the locker room immediately. Del Rio, trying to downplay the incident, reportedly joked that he'd find a new slogan, but the damage was done. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Kevin Allen, crack habit and prison sentence. In 1985, the Philadelphia Eagles used the 9th overall pick on offensive tackle Kevin Allen out of Indiana. He was big, powerful, and expected to anchor the offensive line for years. But within a season, it was already clear something was wrong. Allen struggled badly as a rookie. He couldn't keep up with pass rushers, missed assignments regularly, and was labeled one of the worst picks in team history. Eagles head coach Buddy Ryan was famously blunt about him, saying Allen was a nice guy, but he's got no athletic skills. Then came the off-field collapse. Allen tested positive for cocaine and was banned from the NFL for drug use. Not long after, things got even darker. In 1987, he and a friend were charged with sexually assaulting a woman in a New Jersey hotel room. Allen was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He served nearly half that sentence before being paroled. He attempted a football comeback years later in the World League, but his name had already become synonymous with disaster. O.J. Murdoch, suicide at Titans camp. O.J. Murdoch never played a single down in the NFL, but he was still under contract when his life came to a tragic end. An undrafted wide receiver out of Fort Hays State, Murdoch had bounced around colleges before finally breaking through with a standout senior season. The Tennessee Titans signed him in 2011, and though he spent his rookie year on injured reserve, the team brought him back the following summer for training camp. He never showed up. On July 30th, 2012, just days before camp, police in Tampa, Florida, found Murdoch unresponsive in his car, parked outside the gates of Middleton High School, where he had once starred as a prep athlete. He had died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Murdoch was 25 years old. The Titans were stunned. Teammates had expected him to compete for a spot on the roster. No public signs pointed to what he was going through. His death served as a painful reminder of the mental and emotional struggles some players face in silence. Brian Pata, still unsolved murder. Brian Pata was supposed to be in the NFL. The 22-year-old defensive lineman was a senior at the University of Miami in 2006 and widely projected as a mid-round draft pick. At 6 feet 4 inches, 280 pounds, he had started 3 years for the Hurricanes. Known for his strength, intensity, and leadership, he had already declared for the NFL draft and was months away from achieving a lifelong dream. On the night of November 7, 2006, just hours after practice, Pata was gunned down in the parking lot of his apartment complex in Kendall, Florida. He was shot in the head at close range. No witnesses came forward, no surveillance footage was ever found, and no arrests were made. The case went cold for 15 years. Then, in 2021, police arrested Rashawn Jones, a former Miami teammate of Pata. Investigators believed Jones, who had a history of conflict with Pata, had been harboring resentment over playing time and a shared romantic interest. Despite prior interviews and denials, new witness statements and cell phone records helped lead to the indictment. But as of today, the case has not yet gone to trial. The murder remains unresolved in the eyes of the law. Devon Bess, police standoff. Devon Bess built a reputation as a reliable slot receiver during his time with the Miami Dolphins. Undrafted out of Hawaii in 2008, he carved out a steady 6-year NFL career, catching over 300 passes and becoming a key piece of Miami's offense. His story was supposed to be one of resilience, from a troubled youth to NFL success. But after leaving the league in 2013, everything changed. In January 2014, Bess was arrested at a Florida airport after a bizarre incident in which he removed his shirt, danced wildly, and shouted at law enforcement. He was held for a psychiatric evaluation, and concerns began to mount about his mental health. A few months later, he was arrested again in Arizona after barricading himself in his car during a police standoff. According to reports, Bess had posted erratic and disturbing images on social media in the hours leading up to the standoff. When officers arrived, he refused to comply, locked himself in his vehicle, and remained inside for several tense hours. Eventually, he was taken into custody without incident. After that, Bess vanished from the football world. Mike Kossin, sex addiction, rehab, and arrest. Mike Kossin had a short and largely unremarkable NFL career as a tight end. He bounced between the Jaguars, Bills, and Redskins from 2010 to 2015, mostly serving as a backup and battling repeated knee injuries. But what made Kossin a national headline years later had nothing to do with football, and everything to do with what came after. In 2014, Kossin began dating country singer and actress Jana Kramer. The two quickly married and became a high-profile couple in entertainment circles. But behind the public appearances, their relationship was falling apart. In 2016, Kossin entered rehab for sex addiction after admitting to repeatedly cheating on Kramer, reportedly with dozens of women. The couple separated, reconciled, and later released a book detailing their turbulent marriage, which included multiple relapses, broken trust, and therapy attempts. Their personal life became highly public, with Kossin often portrayed as the villain in the story. Then, in 2021, Kramer filed for divorce, citing infidelity and emotional abuse. Kossin was later arrested for violating a protection order filed against him by Kramer, further darkening an already painful narrative. Johnny Jolly, codeine trafficking charges. Johnny Jolly was once a rising star on the Green Bay Packers defensive line. A 6th-round pick in 2006 out of Texas A&M, he worked his way into the starting lineup by his second season. At 6 feet 3 inches, 325 pounds, Jolly was a disruptive force in the middle of the defense, known for clogging running lanes and bringing an edge to the Packers' front. By 2009, he was considered a key piece of Green Bay's future. But behind the scenes, Jolly had developed a serious addiction to codeine, commonly mixed with soda and candy into a drink known as purple drank. In 2008, he was arrested in Houston for possession of over 200 grams of codeine. While awaiting trial, he kept playing. But in 2010, the NFL suspended him indefinitely. That same year, he was arrested again, this time with over 600 grams of liquid codeine, and charged with felony possession with intent to distribute. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 2011. He served nearly 2 years before being released on early parole. Incredibly, Jolly made a brief comeback with the Packers in 2013 and played in 8 games. But a neck injury ended his return, and he never appeared in the league again. Tom McHale, painkiller overdose, and CTE. Tom McHale played 9 seasons in the NFL as an offensive lineman, primarily with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He wasn't a star, but he was a grinder, smart, disciplined, and known for his toughness in the trenches. He retired in 1995, seemingly ready to move on from football. But football never really let go of him. After retirement, McHale began struggling with chronic pain. The hits he'd absorbed over nearly a decade had taken a toll, and to cope, he turned to prescription painkillers. Over time, the usage turned into dependency. He began doctor shopping, mixing medications, and losing control. His personal life unraveled. He entered rehab, but relapsed multiple times. On May 25, 2008, Tom McHale was found dead in a friend's home in Florida. The cause was an accidental overdose of oxycodone, cocaine, and alcohol. He was 45 years old. After his death, his brain was examined by researchers at Boston University. The diagnosis, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. His widow, Lisa, became one of the early voices in the movement to raise awareness about head trauma in football. She later took a leadership role with the Concussion Legacy Foundation, advocating for player safety and research. Barry Bennett, murdered by his own son. Barry Bennett was a respected former defensive lineman who spent 11 seasons in the NFL, most notably with the New York Jets. A 4th-round pick out of Concordia College in 1978, Bennett carved out a solid professional career, appearing in 132 games and recording nearly 20 sacks. After football, he lived a quiet life back in Minnesota with his wife, Carol. But in August 2019, their rural home in Long Prairie, Minnesota, became the scene of one of the most disturbing stories in NFL history. The couple was found shot to death in their home, and suspicion quickly turned to someone they knew well, their 22-year-old son, Dylan Bennett. Just months prior, Barry had reportedly told authorities that Dylan had expressed homicidal thoughts, and even mentioned wanting to kill his own parents while receiving mental health treatment. Despite the warning signs, Dylan was not institutionalized long-term. Investigators discovered that Dylan had stolen his parents' car and withdrawn large sums of money after the killings. He was captured in Mexico days later and extradited back to the US, where he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. According to prosecutors, he shot both of his parents in the back and torso with a shotgun, then fled the state. Tony Washington, drafted despite a controversial past. Tony Washington was a physically gifted offensive tackle who stood out at Abilene Christian University for his size, technique, and relentless motor. But as the 2010 NFL draft approached, teams weren't just reviewing game tape. They were weighing a backstory that made Washington one of the most controversial prospects in recent memory. At age 16, Washington was convicted in Texas for a legal offense involving a 15-year-old who was his sister. The incident, while non-violent and involving 2 minors, resulted in Washington being required to register under the state's laws. He served his sentence and completed all legal requirements before returning to society and eventually football. Despite the incident, NFL teams knew the full story during the scouting process. Washington had been open about his past with coaches and front offices. Jimmy Hitchcock, caught in Operation Wax House, Jimmy Hitchcock once patrolled NFL secondaries with speed and intensity, suiting up for the Patriots, Vikings, and Panthers. But years after his playing days ended, he found himself at the center of a massive federal investigation. In 2009, Hitchcock was arrested and charged as part of Operation Wax House, a wide-ranging mortgage fraud and money laundering scheme. The operation uncovered a network of real estate professionals, recruiters, and straw buyers who worked together to inflate home values, falsify loan documents, and pocket millions in fraudulent mortgage proceeds. Hitchcock was one of several former athletes and public figures implicated. According to court records, Hitchcock played a role in recruiting participants and facilitating fraudulent transactions. Prosecutors allege that he helped move money through various shell companies and accounts, laundering funds from homes purchased under false pretenses. The scam affected dozens of properties in North Carolina and caused significant losses to lenders. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to nearly 4 years in federal prison. For many, it was shocking to see a former NFL player involved in such an elaborate financial crime. Nate Webster, sentenced after disturbing off-field conduct. Nate Webster was known for his hard-hitting style during his time as a linebacker with the Bengals and Broncos, but after his NFL career ended, headlines about Webster took a far darker turn. In 2012, Webster was convicted on multiple charges stemming from an inappropriate relationship with a teenager. The case revealed that the girl was the daughter of a former assistant coach, and court documents detailed how Webster used threats and intimidation to maintain control over the situation. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. During the trial, prosecutors described a pattern of manipulation and emotional pressure that spanned several months. The jury found the evidence credible and damning. The judge, overseeing the case, emphasized the seriousness of the misconduct and the need for accountability, especially given Webster's status as a former professional athlete. Eugene Robinson, soliciting a prostitute the night before the Super Bowl. Eugene Robinson had built a reputation as one of the NFL's most respected veterans. A 3-time Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion with the Packers, he was seen as a leader on and off the field. So in 1999, when he received the prestigious Bart Starr Award, given annually to the NFL player who best exemplifies outstanding character and leadership, it felt like a fitting capstone to his career. But just hours after receiving that award, Robinson was arrested in Miami for soliciting a prostitute. What made the story more surreal was the timing. It was the night before Super Bowl 33, where Robinson's Falcons were set to take on the Denver Broncos. According to police reports, Robinson approached an undercover female officer and offered her $40 for sex. He was arrested on the spot and taken into custody. The Falcons quickly posted bail to get him released, but the damage was done. The next day, Robinson played in the Super Bowl and performed poorly. He gave up a long touchdown to Rod Smith and missed key tackles throughout the game. Atlanta lost 34-19, and fans and commentators alike couldn't help but wonder whether the events of the previous night had impacted his focus. The fallout was swift. Robinson returned the Bart Starr Award, and the arrest became a permanent stain on what had otherwise been a commendable NFL career. It remains one of the most infamous personal scandals to ever unfold during Super Bowl week. Penn State, Jerry Sandusky scandal, 2011. For decades, Jerry Sandusky was the face of Penn State's defensive dominance. He served as the defensive coordinator under Joe Paterno and helped build one of the most respected football legacies in college history. But beneath the surface, something horrific was unfolding. Starting as early as the 1990s, Sandusky used his nonprofit charity, The Second Mile, to gain access to underprivileged boys. He targeted them, groomed them, and in many cases, assaulted them, sometimes in Penn State facilities. Reports later showed that multiple school officials, including members of the athletic department and even head coach Joe Paterno, had been made aware of concerning behavior. But instead of reporting him to authorities, they handled it internally, quietly removing him from coaching duties, but allowing him continued access to school facilities. In 2011, a grand jury indicted Sandusky. What followed was a national firestorm. He was eventually convicted on 45 counts involving 10 different boys. Joe Paterno, who had once been considered the moral compass of college football, was fired just months before his death. The NCAA responded with historic penalties, a $60 million fine, a 4-year postseason ban, scholarship reductions, and the vacating of 111 wins, stripping Paterno of his all-time wins record. Penn State had built its image on doing things the right way, and the scandal shattered that illusion. It wasn't just a failure of oversight, it was a culture of protection, silence, and denial that allowed one man to exploit young lives for years without consequence. Even now, Penn State is still rebuilding its reputation. The statue of Paterno was removed. The wins were eventually restored, but the scars of the Sandusky case remain. SMU death penalty, 1987. In the 1980s, Southern Methodist University wasn't just a rising football powerhouse. They were a national contender, pulling in top Texas talent and beating traditional giants. But beneath their success was a pay-for-play system so blatant, so institutionalized, that it forced the NCAA to do something they had never done before and haven't done since. For years, SMU boosters and university officials paid players under the table, offering cash, cars, jobs, and housing. The NCAA already sanctioned them multiple times, including placing them on probation 5 separate times between 1974 and 1985. But the payments never stopped. In fact, they were documented. A literal payroll list existed for players, organized by school officials and alumni. When the scandal finally came to a head in 1987, the NCAA dropped the hammer. They issued the infamous death penalty, shutting down the entire SMU football program for the 1987 season. No games, no practices, no scholarships. And the school chose not to play in 1988 either, due to roster depletion. The sanctions included scholarship losses through 1990 and recruiting bans that crippled the team. The result was catastrophic. Nearly every player transferred out, coaches left, attendance cratered. It took SMU over 20 years to return to national relevance, and some argue the program never truly recovered. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. The NCAA had made an example out of SMU, but they also realized the consequences were too severe. Since then, no other Division I program has received the death penalty. Miami booster scandal, 2011. In 2011, a man named Nevin Shapiro turned the University of Miami upside down. He wasn't a coach or player. He was a convicted Ponzi schemer serving 20 years in federal prison. And from behind bars, he exposed one of the most widespread and lavish benefit scandals in college football history. Shapiro, a longtime Hurricanes booster, claimed he had provided more than 70 players with improper benefits from 2002 to 2010. His list was staggering: cash handouts, luxury yacht trips, expensive jewelry, nightclub outings, VIP access to strip clubs, and even paid encounters with prostitutes, all funded by money he had stolen in a $930 million Ponzi scheme. He embedded himself into the program. He sat courtside at games, partied with athletes, and even had his own suite at the stadium. Players called him Lil Luke, a nod to fellow Miami booster and rapper Uncle Luke. Photos surfaced of Shapiro arm in arm with stars like Willis McGahee, Vince Wilfork, and Devin Hester. The NCAA later confirmed much of what he had claimed. The program tried to distance itself quickly, but the damage was done. Head coach Randy Shannon, who reportedly warned players to stay away from Shapiro, had already been fired. Al Golden, who took over in 2011, inherited a mess. Miami self-imposed bowl bans in 2011 and 2012 to soften NCAA penalties. The NCAA sanctioned the program with scholarship reductions and a 3-year probation, but many argued the punishment didn't match the scale of violations. Reggie Bush / USC, 2005. Reggie Bush electrified college football during his time at USC. He won the Heisman Trophy, helped lead the Trojans to national dominance, and looked unstoppable every time he touched the ball. But behind the highlight reels was a scandal that would ultimately erase much of what he accomplished on paper. While Bush was still in school, he and his family accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts from marketing agents, hoping to sign him once he turned pro. The benefits included rent-free housing for his parents, a car, travel expenses, and other luxury items, all in violation of NCAA rules at the time. The scandal came to light after a failed business relationship between Bush's family and the agents turned bitter. Lawsuits were filed, investigations were launched, and the evidence piled up. The NCAA findings were damning. Bush had received impermissible benefits, and USC had failed to monitor the situation properly. The fallout was historic. USC was hit with severe sanctions, including a 2-year bowl ban, the loss of 30 scholarships, and the forfeiture of wins from the 2004 and 2005 seasons. Bush voluntarily forfeited his Heisman Trophy, becoming the first player in history to do so. It was a major blow to the image of one of college football's most storied programs. Ohio State Tattoogate, 2010. Ohio State was a national powerhouse under head coach Jim Tressel, with BCS bowl appearances and a roster full of NFL-caliber talent. But in 2010, a scandal surfaced that started small and quickly spiraled into something that rocked the program. Several Ohio State players, including star quarterback Terrell Pryor, were found to have traded memorabilia, including jerseys, championship rings, and awards, in exchange for tattoos and cash. While the trades themselves seemed harmless to many fans, they were a direct violation of NCAA rules, which prohibited athletes from profiting off their status in any way. The real damage came when it was discovered that Tressel had known about the violations months before they became public and failed to report them. In fact, he had received emails warning him about what his players were doing, but instead of alerting compliance officials, he stayed silent. When confronted, Tressel initially denied knowledge, then admitted he had lied. The fallout was swift. Tressel resigned under pressure, ending his successful tenure in disgrace. Pryor was suspended and later left school early to enter the NFL's supplemental draft. The Buckeyes vacated all their wins from the 2010 season, including a Sugar Bowl victory, and were hit with scholarship reductions and a bowl ban. University of Michigan sign-stealing scandal, 2023. Connor Stalions was an off-field analyst with Michigan football, a former Marine who volunteered his way into the program. In October 2023, the NCAA opened an investigation into alleged off-campus scouting of future opponents, a direct violation of Bylaw 11.6.1, which bans staff from attending opponents' games in the same season. Evidence quickly pointed to Stalions. Investigators allege he purchased tickets to more than 30 games at 11 Big Ten stadiums, handing them off to associates to film sideline hand signals used by upcoming opponents. In one reported instance, Stalions was disguised in Central Michigan staff gear on the sideline for their game against Michigan State on September 2023, raising red flags about intent and deception. Michigan responded by suspending Stalions with pay, and by November 3, 2023, he resigned from the staff. Linebackers coach Chris Partridge was later fired, reportedly for counseling players on how to respond to NCAA questions about the scandal. Head coach Jim Harbaugh, while never linked directly to the scheme, accepted a 3-game Big Ten suspension that year for unrelated recruiting violations. Despite this, Michigan went on to win the 2023 national championship, and NCAA President Charlie Baker later stated he believed the title was earned fair and square. Some experts, including Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, have urged leniency, suggesting Michigan has already been punished significantly, but penalties are still pending and could include postseason bans, scholarship reductions, or more suspensions. North Carolina academic fraud, 2010 to 2017. At the University of North Carolina, the scandal that unfolded was systemic, and it went on for nearly 2 decades. The root of the controversy was in the African and Afro-American Studies Department, where a number of so-called paper classes were offered. These weren't real courses in the traditional sense. No lectures, no attendance, just a single paper required for a passing grade. Hundreds of athletes, especially football and basketball players, were steered toward these classes to maintain eligibility and stay on the field. While the university initially framed it as an academic problem unrelated to athletics, further investigations showed how deeply athletic staff were involved. Academic counselors knowingly enrolled players in these classes to help them stay eligible. Emails showed coordination between academic and athletic departments to guide struggling athletes through the easiest possible coursework. What made the UNC scandal different was the sheer scale. Roughly 3,100 students took the bogus classes over 18 years, and around half were athletes. But when the NCAA concluded its investigation, it chose not to punish the school, arguing that because non-athletes were also enrolled, it couldn't prove the classes were created solely to benefit athletes. The backlash was fierce. Critics accused the NCAA of letting a marquee program off the hook, despite clear evidence of academic manipulation designed to protect the football and basketball teams. It reignited debates about academic integrity and whether major programs were putting sports above education. University of North Carolina kept its banners. No wins were vacated. But the damage to its reputation, especially in academic circles, lingered long after the investigations ended. Jameis Winston allegations. Florida State, 2013. Florida State quarterback Jameis Winston was the face of college football in 2013, a Heisman winner and the leader of an undefeated national championship team. But behind the scenes, a disturbing allegation hung over his meteoric rise. He had been accused of sexual assault nearly a year earlier, and the case had quietly stalled. The incident in question occurred in December 2012, when a fellow FSU student reported to police that she had been assaulted by an unknown man. It wasn't until several months later, after Winston had emerged as a football star, that his name became publicly linked to the case. By then, much of the initial evidence had already gone cold. Witnesses hadn't been thoroughly questioned. The crime scene wasn't processed properly, and the Tallahassee police had essentially shelved the investigation without informing the accuser that the suspect was Winston. When the story finally broke in November 2013, it set off a national firestorm. Critics accused the police and the university of dragging their feet to protect their quarterback. There were concerns about conflicts of interest, especially given how deeply ingrained football was in Tallahassee culture. The investigation was eventually reopened under public pressure, but no charges were filed, with prosecutors citing insufficient evidence. Even though Winston never faced criminal charges, the fallout didn't end there. Florida State later settled a Title IX lawsuit with the accuser for $950,000. The university was also criticized for failing to conduct its own timely disciplinary hearing, as required under federal law. Throughout the ordeal, Winston remained on the field, guiding FSU to a national title and continuing his career unimpeded. But the scandal raised uncomfortable questions about how allegations involving star athletes are handled, especially when millions of dollars in school reputations are on the line. Baylor sexual assault scandal, 2016. Baylor was one of the last places anyone expected a scandal of this scale. A small Christian university with a rising football program, under coach Art Briles, Baylor had become a Big 12 powerhouse. But behind the success was a culture of silence, power, and devastating neglect. Between 2012 and 2016, a wave of sexual assault allegations emerged involving Baylor football players. Women came forward accusing multiple athletes of rape and assault, often reporting incidents to university officials. But rather than investigate thoroughly or hold anyone accountable, those in power, from coaches to administrators, appeared more focused on protecting the program's reputation. Internal reports would later reveal that Baylor failed to act on numerous allegations. In some cases, the university discouraged victims from filing complaints. In others, law enforcement cooperation was suspiciously absent. According to investigations, Art Briles and his staff knew about several incidents and either ignored them or worked behind the scenes to keep things quiet. One particularly chilling report alleged that Baylor football players had committed as many as 52 acts of assault over 4 years. The exact number was debated, but the culture of permissiveness was undeniable. The fallout was massive. Art Briles was fired. Baylor's president, Ken Starr, yes, the same Ken Starr from the Clinton impeachment investigation, resigned. Athletic director Ian McCaw stepped down, and the NCAA launched its own investigation. But what made the Baylor scandal stand out was how deeply the university failed its students. Football players were allowed to keep playing despite credible allegations. Victims were left unsupported, and the system, from the top down, seemed more concerned with wins and headlines than with justice. To this day, Baylor's handling of the scandal remains one of the most damning examples of institutional failure in college football history. Cam Newton recruitment scandal, 2010. Cam Newton's road to superstardom wasn't a straight shot. Before becoming a Heisman Trophy winner and national champion at Auburn, he was at the center of a swirling recruitment controversy that nearly derailed his rise. The saga began when Newton transferred from a junior college to Auburn in 2010. Almost immediately, questions surfaced about how and why he ended up there, especially given that Mississippi State had been heavily pursuing him too. Then came the bombshell, a report alleging that Newton's father, Cecil Newton, had solicited a six-figure payment from Mississippi State boosters in exchange for his son's commitment, and the NCAA launched its own investigation. Mississippi State coaches confirmed they were approached with a pay-for-play proposition. The evidence suggested that Cecil Newton had indeed asked for money, but crucially, there was no proof Cam himself knew anything about it. This technicality became the hinge on which the entire case rested. Incredibly, just days before the SEC championship game, the NCAA ruled Newton eligible. Their reasoning? While a violation occurred, Cam's lack of direct knowledge meant Auburn could keep playing him. It was a decision that baffled some and infuriated others, especially considering the NCAA's usually strict stance on impermissible benefits. Newton went on to win the Heisman Trophy and lead Auburn to a national championship. But the cloud never fully cleared. Critics argued that Auburn had escaped accountability on a loophole. Meanwhile, the case highlighted the murky world of college football recruiting, where families, boosters, and bagmen often operate in the shadows, while athletes claim plausible deniability. Despite the controversy, Newton's legacy remained intact on the field. Maurice Claret, Ohio State, 2003. Maurice Claret had one of the fastest rises and most dramatic falls in college football history. As a true freshman in 2002, he led Ohio State to a national championship, scoring the game-winning touchdown in double overtime against Miami. He was instantly a star, but within months, the fairy tale started unraveling. In 2003, Claret was suspended for the entire season after an NCAA investigation revealed he had received thousands of dollars in improper benefits, things like cash advances from boosters and free cars. He was also accused of lying to investigators about a stolen car incident involving a friend. The suspension effectively ended his college career. Rather than returning to school, Claret attempted to challenge the NFL's eligibility rules, arguing he should be allowed to enter the draft after just 1 year out of high school. The case went to federal court, where he initially won, only for the decision to be overturned on appeal. He was ultimately barred from entering the 2004 draft. By the time Claret finally became eligible in 2005, his stock had plummeted. He was a third-round pick by the Denver Broncos, but showed up to camp out of shape, and was cut before playing a single down. Things got worse from there. In 2006, he was arrested after robbing 2 people at gunpoint outside a nightclub in Columbus. When police pulled him over, they found 4 loaded guns and a bottle of vodka in his SUV, all while he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Claret was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison, serving over 3. He eventually turned his life around, earning a degree, speaking publicly about mental health, and founding a behavioral health agency in Ohio. Marcus Vick, Virginia Tech, 2005. Marcus Vick entered college football with immense hype. As the younger brother of Michael Vick, one of the most electric players in the sport's history, expectations were sky high. He had the same dual threat ability, the same cannon arm, and the same ability to make defenders look silly. But his time at Virginia Tech was defined less by highlight plays and more by headlines, and not the good kind. Vick's off-field problems started early. In 2004, he was suspended for the entire season after being charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He was accused of providing alcohol to underage girls and having sexual contact with one of them. He was also cited for reckless driving and marijuana possession that year. Even with the suspension, Virginia Tech gave him another chance. The university claimed he was undergoing personal growth and deserved an opportunity to redeem himself. But 2005 was chaos. On the field, he showed flashes of brilliance and helped the Hokies go 11-2. Off the field, the controversies piled up. During the Gator Bowl, Vick deliberately stomped on the leg of Louisville defensive end Elvis Dumervil, a move that caused outrage and circulated nationwide. Just days later, he was pulled over for speeding, going 38 miles over the limit, and driving on a suspended license. That was the final straw. Virginia Tech dismissed Vick from the program entirely. The university president said there is no more opportunity for Marcus Vick at Virginia Tech. He declared for the NFL draft shortly after, but went undrafted. The Miami Dolphins picked him up as a free agent and converted him into a wide receiver, but he never made an impact. His NFL career ended after just one season. Over the years, Vick has had more run-ins with the law, including charges of brandishing a firearm, DUI, and resisting arrest. He remains one of the most frustrating what-if stories in college football. Lawrence Phillips, Nebraska, 1995. Lawrence Phillips was the ultimate contradiction, a generational talent who constantly battled personal demons. At Nebraska, he was a powerhouse running back with NFL-caliber strength and agility, helping the Cornhuskers win 2 national championships under head coach Tom Osborne. But behind the scenes, Phillips's behavior raised red flags long before the public ever found out. In 1995, Nebraska had just dominated Michigan State when news broke that Phillips had broken into the apartment of his ex-girlfriend, a Nebraska basketball player, and physically assaulted her. He dragged her down 3 flights of stairs by her hair. The incident was brutal and public. The university suspended him immediately, but the backlash was intense. Yet, just 6 weeks later, Osborne reinstated Phillips to the team, claiming he believed football was the best structure to keep him from spiraling further. Many criticized the decision as a win-at-all-costs move. Osborne defended it as giving a young man a second chance, but it became one of the most controversial moments of his Hall of Fame career. Phillips returned to the field and played in the 1996 Fiesta Bowl National Championship game. He scored a touchdown and rushed for 165 yards, helping Nebraska cap off a 12-0 season. He then declared for the NFL draft, where the St. Louis Rams still took him 6th overall, despite widespread concern about his behavior. It didn't take long for those concerns to turn into headlines. He clashed with coaches, showed up late to meetings, and was arrested multiple times, including for domestic violence against a girlfriend. He bounced around to the 49ers, Dolphins, and even the CFL, but his off-field issues always followed. Eventually, Phillips was sentenced to over 30 years in prison for domestic abuse, assault with a deadly weapon, and other charges. While incarcerated, he was charged with the murder of his cellmate, then later found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide. Bobby Petrino motorcycle crash scandal, Arkansas, 2012. In April 2012, Bobby Petrino was on top of the world. He had just led the Arkansas Razorbacks to an 11-2 season and a top 5 national ranking. The program was thriving, boosters were happy, and Petrino was seen as one of the most brilliant offensive minds in college football. Then came the motorcycle crash. At first, the story seemed like a strange but harmless accident. Petrino crashed his Harley-Davidson on a quiet Arkansas highway, sustaining injuries to his neck and face. He held a press conference shortly after, wearing a neck brace and insisting he was alone at the time of the crash. The university released a statement backing him, and the situation appeared to be contained. But everything unraveled fast. A police report later revealed that Petrino was not alone. He had been riding with Jessica Dorrell, a 25-year-old former Razorback volleyball player, whom Petrino had recently hired for a position within the football department. That hiring skipped standard protocol and raised major red flags. As it turned out, Petrino and Dorrell were having an inappropriate relationship. Not only had he hired her out of a pool of over 150 applicants, but he had also given her a $20,000 cash gift, an amount that went completely unreported. When this information surfaced, it became impossible for the university to justify his continued employment. The university launched an investigation and concluded that Petrino had knowingly misled athletic department officials, failed to disclose the relationship, and violated multiple university policies. On April 10, 2012, Arkansas officially fired him with cause, meaning he received no buyout from the multi-million-dollar contract he had signed just a year prior. The scandal became a viral spectacle. The image of Petrino in a neck brace with road rash on his face turned into a meme overnight. But behind the public mockery was a serious reminder of how power secrecy, and personal decisions could bring down even the most successful programs in a matter of days. Petrino's fall from grace was swift. Once regarded as a genius play caller destined for an elite program, he now had to rebuild his career from the bottom. He eventually returned to coaching, but the motorcycle crash and everything it revealed became a permanent stain on his legacy. Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens was one of the most talented and polarizing wide receivers in NFL history. Over a 15-year career, he racked up over 15,000 receiving yards and 153 touchdowns, making him a lock for the Hall of Fame. But despite earning an estimated $80 million during his playing days, Owens faced serious financial troubles after retirement. Much of his downfall came from poor investments and excessive spending. Owens lived lavishly, multiple homes, luxury cars, and heavy child support obligations. At one point, he was paying support for 4 different children across multiple states, adding up to nearly $45,000 per month. When his NFL check stopped coming, the lifestyle didn't. He also trusted the wrong financial advisors, who reportedly lost millions of his money in risky and poorly managed investments. By 2012, just 2 years after leaving the league, Owens admitted he was broke and living off appearances and small contracts in semi-pro football. To his credit, Owens eventually stabilized his finances, took ownership of his mistakes, and rebuilt a brand through business ventures and public appearances. But his story is one of the most striking examples of how quickly fame and fortune can disappear, even for one of the greatest receivers of all time, Michael Vick. Michael Vick's story is one of the most dramatic rises and falls in NFL history. Coming out of Virginia Tech, he became the first overall pick in the 2001 draft and completely changed how people viewed the quarterback position. His athleticism was revolutionary. At his peak with the Atlanta Falcons, Vick was one of the highest paid players in football, earning over $130 million in contracts and endorsements. But in 2007, everything came crashing down. Vick was convicted for his role in a dogfighting operation and sentenced to 23 months in federal prison. The scandal destroyed his reputation, cost him tens of millions in salary, and wiped out endorsement deals with Nike, EA Sports, and others. When he was released from prison in 2009, Vick filed for bankruptcy. Court records showed he owed roughly $20 million to creditors, a mix of unpaid taxes, bad investments, and legal fees. He had spent lavishly on houses, cars, and a massive entourage during his early career, and without steady income, the money evaporated fast. Vick managed a remarkable comeback on the field with the Philadelphia Eagles, earning a Pro Bowl selection in 2010, and paying off the majority of his debts through his new contracts. He also rebuilt his public image by speaking out against animal cruelty and supporting community programs. In the end, Michael Vick became one of the rare athletes to climb out of financial ruin, but his story is a lasting example of how quickly fortune and fame can disappear, and how hard it is to recover once they do. Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson was one of the most dominant running backs the NFL has ever seen. Drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in 2007, he won MVP in 2012 after rushing for more than 2,000 yards, less than a year removed from a torn ACL. Over a 15-year career, he earned more than $100 million in salary, the most ever, for an NFL running back. But despite that fortune, Peterson's finances unraveled. By 2019, court documents revealed he owed several million dollars to creditors. His lawyers said that bad investments and trusting the wrong people had drained his wealth. Peterson had loaned and invested large sums through advisors who either mismanaged or misused his money, and the legal costs of recovering it only deepened the problem. He also lived an expensive lifestyle, multiple homes, luxury cars, and family obligations that were difficult to maintain once his NFL income slowed. By his mid-30s, he was still playing partly to repay debts, signing short contracts with Washington, Detroit, and Tennessee, long after most players at his position had retired. Peterson's story is a reminder of how even generational earnings can vanish quickly when combined with poor advice, high spending, and misplaced trust. On the field, he was a legend. Off it, another cautionary tale about how fleeting NFL wealth can be. Dan Marino. Dan Marino was one of the most prolific passers in NFL history. Over 17 seasons with the Miami Dolphins, he threw for more than 61,000 yards, made 9 Pro Bowls, and earned a spot in the Hall of Fame. During the 1980s and 90s, he was one of football's first megastars, signing lucrative contracts and endorsement deals that easily put his career earnings well above $50 million, a huge figure for that era. After retirement, Marino remained in the spotlight as a television analyst and public figure. But behind the scenes, some of his investments began to unravel. The most public example came in 2012, when the digital company Digital Domain Media Group, in which Marino had invested millions, filed for bankruptcy. Marino reportedly lost nearly $14 million when the company collapsed. He also dealt with several real estate and business ventures that failed to produce returns, a common theme for former athletes trying to transition into entrepreneurship without experienced financial oversight. Unlike some of his peers, Marino didn't declare personal bankruptcy or face major legal issues, but the losses significantly dented what had been a comfortable post-NFL fortune. Marino recovered by scaling back his ventures, focusing on broadcasting work and philanthropy through the Dan Marino Foundation, which supports children with autism. His story is less about reckless spending and more about the risks of trusting volatile investments, even for one of football's smartest quarterbacks, Warren Sapp. Warren Sapp was one of the most dominant defensive linemen of his era, a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and one of the defining players of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' great defenses in the early 2000s. Over his 13-year career, he earned more than $80 million in salary and endorsements. But after retirement, Sapp's finances spiraled out of control. By 2012, he filed for bankruptcy, listing more than $6.7 million in debt against just $6.4 million in assets. Among the debts were hundreds of thousands in child support and alimony payments, unpaid taxes, and loans tied to bad real estate ventures. Sapp was also caught in the housing market crash, owning multiple properties that lost enormous value. He listed items like hundreds of pairs of Air Jordans, expensive jewelry, and his Super Bowl ring among the possessions he had to liquidate. Unlike some players, Sapp didn't completely vanish from public life. He built a post-NFL media career with NFL Network, though that ended in 2015 after legal troubles off the field. Warren Sapp's story is a reminder that even Hall of Famers aren't immune to financial collapse. Despite earning generational wealth, poor planning, excessive spending, and unstable investments left one of the game's greatest defensive players starting over after football. Mark Ingram Sr. Mark Ingram Sr. was a Super Bowl winning wide receiver who played 10 seasons in the NFL, most notably with the New York Giants. He was a key piece of their 1990 championship team and earned a reputation as a tough, reliable target. During his career, he made millions in salary, solid money for the era. But after football, his life and finances took a sharp downturn. After retiring in the mid-1990s, Ingram became entangled in several legal and financial troubles. He lost large portions of his money through poor business ventures and unpaid debts. Things got worse when he was convicted of money laundering and bank fraud in the early 2000s. In 2008, he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison after violating probation and failing to report for his sentence, going on the run until he was caught by U.S. Marshals. While incarcerated, his son, Mark Ingram II, was emerging as a star running back at Alabama. The contrast between their lives, a father in prison while his son was winning the Heisman Trophy, made headlines across the country. Since his release, Ingram Sr. has kept a much lower profile, occasionally seen supporting his son's career. His story serves as one of the most tragic examples of an NFL player's post-career collapse, not from overspending or mismanagement, but from crossing into criminal activity that cost him his freedom and his fortune. Bernie Kosar. Bernie Kosar was a hometown hero in Cleveland. The former University of Miami star became the Browns' franchise quarterback in the mid-1980s and led them to multiple AFC championship appearances. On the field, he was smart, accurate, and tough, the kind of player Cleveland fans adored. Over his 12-year career, he earned millions in salary and endorsements, and after retiring, he remained a beloved figure in the city. But Kosar's post-NFL life was defined by financial collapse. After football, he invested heavily in restaurants, real estate, and various business ventures around Ohio and Florida. Many of them failed. He also admitted to being far too generous, loaning and giving money to family members, friends, and former teammates who never paid him back. By 2009, he filed for bankruptcy, listing nearly $18 million in debt against about $9 million in assets. Kosar also battled personal struggles, including health issues related to repeated concussions and the painkillers prescribed to manage them. In interviews, he's been open about how those problems compounded his financial stress. In the years since, he's slowly rebuilt stability, focusing on broadcasting work and community outreach in Cleveland. He's spoken candidly about the lessons he learned and the importance of financial discipline for athletes. Bernie Kosar's story isn't one of reckless spending. It's about trust, generosity, and the harsh reality that even good intentions can lead to financial ruin when the checks stop coming. Travis Henry. Travis Henry was a powerful running back who entered the NFL in 2001 as a second-round pick for the Buffalo Bills. He had back-to-back 1,300-yard seasons early in his career and later played for the Titans and Broncos. Over 7 seasons, he earned more than $20 million, but his financial and legal troubles quickly overwhelmed him after retirement. Henry's biggest issue was child support debt. He reportedly fathered 11 children with 10 different women, and the monthly payments combined to tens of thousands of dollars. When his career ended, the income that had sustained that obligation disappeared almost overnight. The Bills didn't. His problems deepened when he turned to risky ways of finding money. In 2008, he was arrested on federal drug trafficking charges and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. Prosecutors said he financed a cocaine distribution ring, something Henry claimed he did only to try to stay afloat financially. By the time he was released, his fortune was gone and his reputation destroyed. His story shows how lifestyle choices and poor financial planning can sink even talented athletes earning millions. On the field, he had the power to carry defenders. Off the field, the weight of debt and bad decisions carried him down instead. Chris McAllister. Chris McAllister was one of the best cornerbacks of the 2000s, a shutdown defender who helped lead the Baltimore Ravens to a Super Bowl title in 2000. Over an 11-year career, he earned 3 Pro Bowl selections and made more than $40 million in salary and bonuses. On the field, he had everything: athleticism, swagger, and consistency. Off the field, though, his financial situation slowly collapsed. After injuries shortened his career, McAllister's income dried up, but his lifestyle didn't change. He owned multiple luxury cars and homes, and supported family and friends long after his NFL checks stopped. By 2009, just a year after leaving the league, reports surfaced that he was broke and living in his parents' house. Court filings from a child support case revealed he claimed to have no income and no funds, despite the fortune he'd earned over the previous decade. McAllister's downfall wasn't linked to criminal issues or massive scams. It was a case of overspending and poor financial management. Like many players, he didn't prepare for how short the average NFL career really is. In retirement, he's largely stayed out of the spotlight, living quietly away from the game he once dominated. His story is another reminder that even top-tier players, without the right financial discipline, can see millions disappear almost overnight. Andre Rison, known as Bad Moon, was one of the NFL's most talented and entertaining wide receivers of the 1990s. He played for 7 different teams, made 5 Pro Bowls, and earned over $20 million in career salary. On the field, he was a highlight reel, explosive, charismatic, and confident. Off it, his life often made as many headlines as his performances. Rison's financial downfall stemmed from a combination of high spending, unstable personal relationships, and poor money management. At the height of his fame, he lived extravagantly. Multiple houses, flashy jewelry, luxury cars, and a massive entourage. He was also famously involved in a turbulent relationship with singer Lisa Left Eye Lopez, TLC, which ended dramatically when she burned down his mansion during an argument in 1994. Over the years, Rison faced mounting debts and unpaid child support claims across several states. Despite later admitting to having made over $20 million in his playing career, he said most of it disappeared through impulsive decisions and misplaced trust in financial advisors. After football, Ricin tried coaching and even appeared in ESPN's Broke documentary, speaking candidly about his mistakes and the lessons learned. He managed to rebuild his life to some degree, focusing on mentoring younger players and his son, Hunter Ricin, who followed him into football. Andre Ricin's story is one of pure talent overshadowed by poor choices, a reminder that fame and money can vanish as quickly as they appear when there's no plan to sustain them. Clinton Portis. Clinton Portis was one of the NFL's premier running backs in the 2000s. Drafted by Denver in 2002, he burst onto the scene with back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons before being traded to Washington, where he signed a contract worth more than $50 million, one of the largest ever for a running back at the time. Over 9 seasons, he earned roughly $43 million, enough to secure his future many times over. But Portis's post-NFL story became one of financial disaster. He trusted a team of financial advisors who allegedly mishandled and outright stole his money. By 2011, millions had vanished through risky real estate ventures, fraudulent investment schemes, and unpaid taxes. Portis eventually filed for bankruptcy in 2015, listing debts of nearly $5 million. The stress of losing his fortune reportedly pushed him to a breaking point. In an interview with Sports Illustrated, Portis admitted that he once contemplated confronting and possibly harming the advisors who cost him everything before a friend talked him down. Years later, things got worse. In 2021, Portis was convicted in a federal case involving healthcare fraud, where several ex-players were caught submitting false claims to the NFL's health program. He served time in prison before being released in 2023. Clinton Portis's story is tragic because it combines all the classic pitfalls: misplaced trust, bad investments, and desperation faced by athletes who earn millions quickly and lose it just as fast. For a few years, he was one of football's brightest stars. Off the field, his finances became one of its darkest cautionary tales. Mark Brunell. Mark Brunell was one of the NFL's most respected quarterbacks during the 1990s and early 2000s. Best known for his time with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he led the team to multiple playoff appearances and earned 3 Pro Bowl selections. Over a 19-year career that included stops in Green Bay, Washington, and New Orleans, Brunell earned more than $50 million in salary. But after his playing days ended, Brunell's business ventures dragged him into deep financial trouble. He invested heavily in real estate and several fast food franchises with former teammates, but the ventures collapsed after the 2008 housing market crash. He personally guaranteed many of the loans used to fund those projects, and when the businesses failed, the banks came after him. By 2010, Brunell filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing more than $25 million in debt against only $5 million in assets. He lost most of his investments, several properties, and a large portion of his savings. What made his case stand out was that Brunell wasn't reckless. By all accounts, he lived modestly and tried to build legitimate businesses. But poor timing and over-leveraging destroyed what he'd earned. Since then, Brunell has rebuilt his life. He transitioned into coaching, eventually becoming the quarterback's coach for the Detroit Lions, and he's been active in community and faith-based programs. His story is a reminder that sometimes financial collapse doesn't come from extravagance. It comes from the risks of entrepreneurship and the unforgiving nature of debt. Dermontti Dawson. Dermontti Dawson is widely considered one of the greatest centers to ever play in the NFL, spending his entire 13-year career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. From 1988 to 2000, he was a 7-time Pro Bowler, 6-time All-Pro, and eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame. He earned millions during his playing days and was universally respected for his intelligence, leadership, and work ethic. But like many players from his era, Dawson faced financial turmoil after retirement. He invested heavily in real estate and business ventures around Kentucky, including property development projects and fitness facilities. When the 2008 housing market collapsed, those investments backfired. several of his properties went underwater, and the debts began to pile up faster than the income could cover them. By 2010, Dawson filed for bankruptcy, listing around $69 million in liabilities. Much of it came from personally guaranteed loans on failed real estate deals. Despite the staggering number, reports indicated that he didn't live an extravagant lifestyle. He simply got caught in the wrong market at the wrong time. Afterward, Dawson shifted toward rebuilding stability. He became involved in business consulting, charitable work, and speaking engagements, using his story to warn younger players about the risks of debt and overextension. His story isn't one of recklessness, but of how even careful, disciplined players can face ruin when the economy turns. Dermontti Dawson remains a Hall of Famer, not just for his play, but for his honesty about the lessons learned after football. Vince Young. Vince Young's story is one of the biggest what-ifs in NFL history. Coming out of Texas, he was a college legend, a national champion, and one of the most electrifying players the game had ever seen. Drafted 3rd overall in 2006, he became the NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year and a 2-time Pro Bowler. Over his career, Young earned an estimated $35 to $40 million in salary and another $30 million in endorsements. But within a few years of leaving the league, nearly all of it was gone. Reports revealed that Young spent recklessly, buying luxury cars, throwing lavish parties, and once, allegedly, spending $5,000 at a single TGI Fridays. He also made several bad financial decisions, including loans he couldn't repay, and trusting advisors who mismanaged his funds. In 2014, Young filed for bankruptcy, listing less than $1 million in assets and nearly the same in debts. Court documents showed unpaid loans, mounting legal fees, and lingering tax issues. By his own admission, he had little understanding of where much of his money had gone. Since then, Young has tried to rebuild his life. He's worked in university programs at Texas, done broadcasting, and advocated for financial education among athletes. While his career on the field was short, his off-field struggles became a harsh lesson about how fast wealth can disappear without guidance or structure. Vince Young's name once symbolized limitless potential, both athletically and financially. But like too many before him, the fame and fortune faded faster than anyone imagined. Deuce McAllister. Deuce McAllister was the heart of the New Orleans Saints offense in the early 2000s. A fan favorite, known for his powerful running style and quiet leadership. Drafted in 2001, he spent his entire 8-year career with the Saints, earning 2 Pro Bowl selections and becoming the team's all-time leading rusher. He earned tens of millions during his playing days and was a beloved figure in Louisiana, both on and off the field. But after retirement, McAllister's finances took a major hit. He owned several car dealerships in Mississippi, most notably a Nissan franchise, which fell into debt after the 2008 economic crash. By 2009, the dealership filed for bankruptcy, and McAllister personally owed Nissan Motor Acceptance Corporation over $1.5 million in unpaid loans and inventory costs. McAllister had personally guaranteed much of the debt, which meant he was liable even after the business closed. The financial stress reportedly wiped out a large portion of his savings. Still, unlike many players who disappear after bankruptcy, McAllister stayed active in his community, continuing charity work and maintaining a close relationship with the Saints organization. He later found stability as a radio broadcaster for Saints games and through business consulting and public speaking. McAllister's story isn't one of reckless spending. It's about the risk of tying post-career ventures to unstable markets. Even one of the league's most respected players learned how quickly fortunes can turn when business investments collapse. Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell's career became the benchmark for wasted potential and financial collapse in the NFL. Drafted 1st overall by the Oakland Raiders in 2007, he was supposed to be the franchise quarterback to bring the team back to glory. His rookie contract was worth an astounding $61 million, with $32 million guaranteed, one of the richest rookie deals in league history at the time. But Russell's work ethic and conditioning became constant concerns. He struggled to learn the playbook, missed team workouts, and never found consistency on the field. In just 3 seasons, he started 25 games, winning only 7, and finished with more interceptions than touchdowns. By 2010, the Raiders released him, and his NFL career was over at just 24 years old. Despite earning over $36 million, Russell's fortune evaporated within a few years. Reports said he lived lavishly, expensive jewelry, cars, and houses, while failing to manage taxes or long-term finances. He later admitted that he fell into depression after being labeled the biggest bust in NFL history, and the financial fallout followed. In later interviews, Russell said he tried to make a comeback, even offering to play for free, but no team gave him a chance. His story has since become both a warning and a human story. A young player given unimaginable money and expectations before he was ready for either. Jamarcus Russell's financial downfall wasn't just about spending. It was about losing direction when the game, the fame, and the money disappeared all at once. Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor changed how defenses played. Drafted in 1981, Taylor dominated the NFL through sheer intensity, athleticism, and chaos. He won 2 Super Bowls, 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and became one of the few defensive players ever to win league MVP. By the time he retired in 1993, he had earned millions in salary and endorsements, with his name synonymous with defensive greatness. But Taylor's off-field life was turbulent, and it cost him dearly. Throughout his career, he battled drug addiction, run-ins with the law, and mounting debts. The combination of reckless spending, failed business ventures, and years of substance abuse drained his fortune. His legal troubles after retirement, including tax issues and multiple arrests, only made things worse. At one point, Taylor admitted that his finances were in disarray, saying he trusted the wrong people and lived far beyond his means. Lavish houses, cars, and constant partying burned through what he earned. Despite attempts to rebuild through coaching, appearances, and reality TV, much of his wealth never returned. Lawrence Taylor remains a football legend, but his financial and personal struggles became as famous as his highlight reels. His story stands as one of the clearest examples of how fame and fortune can be undone by addiction and chaos. Even for one of the greatest to ever play the game, Johnny Unitas. Johnny Unitas was one of the NFL's original superstars, the prototype for the modern quarterback. Known as Johnny U, he led the Baltimore Colts to 3 NFL championships, a Super Bowl, and 3 MVP awards during his 18-year career. His precision passing, leadership, and toughness defined professional football in the late 1950s and 1960s. But even for a legend like Unitas, financial trouble found its way after retirement. Unlike today's players, Unitas didn't earn massive contracts during his playing years. His highest annual salary was around $125,000. When he left the game, he looked to business to build wealth, but most of those ventures failed. He invested heavily in restaurants, bowling alleys, and real estate projects that either collapsed or never turned a profit. By the late 1980s, Unitas had filed for bankruptcy, citing nearly $4 million in losses from failed deals and unpaid loans. The collapse was worsened by trusting poor financial partners and overextending into ventures that needed constant cash flow to survive. His name carried weight, but it wasn't enough to save the businesses bearing it. Despite his financial struggles, Unitas remained an icon in Baltimore, running youth programs, doing speaking engagements, and mentoring young players. He passed away in 2002, still deeply respected as a pioneer of the sport, but with a reminder that fame and legacy don't guarantee financial security. Johnny Unitas built the foundation of modern quarterback play. Unfortunately, like many who came before the era of big contracts, his fortune didn't last nearly as long as his influence. Raghib Ismail. Raghib Rocket Ismail was one of the fastest and most exciting players college football had ever seen. At Notre Dame, he was a superstar, a 2-time All-American who finished second in the 1990 Heisman Trophy race. Instead of entering the NFL right away, he shocked the sports world by signing with the CFL's Toronto Argonauts on an unprecedented $18.2 million contract, making him the highest-paid football player in the world at the time. When he eventually joined the NFL in 1993, Ismail had a solid career, playing 9 seasons for the Raiders, Panthers, and Cowboys. He earned millions more in contracts and endorsements. But despite all of that money, he ended up losing almost everything. After retirement, Ismail invested heavily in a series of failed ventures: car customization shops, music production companies, clothing lines, and even a plan to open a theme restaurant. Most of these were launched through friends or associates who lacked business experience. One by one, they collapsed, leaving Ismail deep in debt. In interviews, he said that his downfall wasn't from wild spending, but from misplaced trust. He tried to help people around him succeed and spread his wealth too thin. As the failed ventures piled up, his savings evaporated. Still, Ismail didn't disappear. He transitioned into broadcasting, motivational speaking, and mentorship programs for young athletes. His story remains a warning for players who come into sudden wealth. Not every loss comes from greed or excess. Sometimes it comes from trying to do too much, too fast, with too many people. Raghib Ismail was once nicknamed the Rocket for how quickly he could take off down a field, but his fortune, like his career, proved to move just as fast in the opposite direction. Damar Hamlin. On January 2, 2023, Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin suffered cardiac arrest during a game against the Cincinnati Bengals. After making a routine tackle, he collapsed backward onto the turf, motionless. Medical staff reached him within seconds and began CPR. An AED delivered shocks to restart his heart, and he was rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. For nearly a week, he remained in critical condition, sedated in the ICU, while the football world held its breath. Hamlin later said the cause was commotio cordis, a rare cardiac arrest triggered by a blow to the chest at just the wrong moment of the heartbeat. Hamlin survived because of immediate CPR, rapid defibrillation, and world-class trauma response on site. 9 days later, he was discharged from the hospital. Months later, he was medically cleared to return to football. By the 2023 season, he was back on the field. Kevin Everett. On September 9, 2007, Buffalo Bills tight end Kevin Everett's life changed in an instant. During the second-half kickoff against the Denver Broncos, Everett made a tackle on returner Dominic Hickson. His head struck the ball carrier's shoulder, and he immediately collapsed. He didn't move. Trainers rushed onto the field, and it quickly became clear the situation was far more serious than a routine injury. Everett had suffered a catastrophic cervical spine injury, a fracture and dislocation between the third and fourth vertebrae. The trauma threatened to permanently paralyze him, and in the first hours after surgery, doctors admitted his chances of walking again were slim. But Everett's case became a breakthrough in emergency treatment. Team spine surgeon Dr. Andrew Cappuccino administered induced hypothermia by running cold saline through an IV as Everett was transported. Cooling his body helped limit swelling and damage around the spinal cord. Surgeons stabilized his spine with a graft and plate that night. Incredibly, within 48 hours, Everett moved his arms and legs and walked independently by mid-December and met teammates at the home finale. His NFL career was over, but his recovery was hailed as a medical triumph and proof that immediate intervention and innovative treatment can change outcomes. Kevin Everett went from a moment doctors called dismal to walking again within months. His story remains one of the most dramatic examples of survival and resilience in NFL history. Reggie Brown. On December 21st, 1997, Detroit Lions linebacker Reggie Brown nearly lost his life on the field. Late in a game against the New York Jets, Brown made a tackle and didn't get up. He laid motionless on the turf at the Pontiac Silverdome as teammates and fans watched in silence. Trainers rushed in and quickly realized he wasn't breathing. His spinal cord injury had cut off his ability to draw air. CPR began immediately, and doctors used emergency equipment to restore his breathing. Brown was immobilized and rushed to Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. Doctors later said that without such a rapid response, he would have died within minutes. Surgery stabilized his spine, and over time he regained movement in his arms and legs. But his football career ended that day. He never played another down. Chris Sims. On September 24th, 2006, Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Chris Sims nearly died from internal bleeding after finishing a game against the Carolina Panthers. During the game, Sims took repeated hits to the chest and abdomen. He stayed in, battling through pain, and even led a late touchdown drive. What no one realized at the time was that his spleen had ruptured. By the time he left the stadium, he was pale, weak, and in critical condition. Doctors rushed him into surgery, where they removed his ruptured spleen. They later said he had lost nearly 5 pints of blood. Without immediate medical attention, the injury would have been fatal. Sims returned to football the following season, but he was never the same player. The combination of recovery, lost strength, and competition for the starting job ended his time as Tampa Bay's franchise quarterback. His career never fully recovered. Alex Smith. On November 18, 2018, Washington quarterback Alex Smith suffered one of the most gruesome injuries in NFL history. While being sacked by Houston's J.J. Watt and Kareem Jackson, Smith's leg was twisted violently under him. The result was a compound fracture of both the tibia and fibula in his right leg. He was carted off the field, his season immediately over. But the injury itself was only the beginning of the fight. Smith underwent emergency surgery, but complications followed. His wound developed a severe infection, a flesh-eating bacteria that nearly cost him not just his leg, but his life. Doctors later said amputation was on the table, and he required 17 surgeries over the course of months to remove infected tissue, stabilize the bones, and reconstruct the leg with skin grafts and muscle transfers. For a long time, survival and basic mobility were the only goals. Smith wore an external fixator that ran through his leg just to keep it together. Walking again seemed uncertain. Playing football again felt impossible. But after nearly 2 years of rehab, he shocked the world. In 2020, Alex Smith was medically cleared and returned to the field. He started 6 games for Washington, won NFL Comeback Player of the Year, and proved resilience few thought possible. Jason Pierre-Paul. On July 4, 2015, New York Giants defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul nearly lost his life in a fireworks accident. While celebrating Independence Day in Florida, Pierre-Paul mishandled a powerful firework that exploded in his hand. The blast caused severe injuries, including the amputation of his right index finger and parts of his thumb, along with fractures and burns. He was rushed into emergency surgery to save his hand, and doctors later said the quick medical response prevented potentially fatal blood loss. At the time, his NFL future looked doubtful. Losing grip strength and dexterity is devastating for a defensive lineman, but just 4 months later, Pierre-Paul returned to the field with a heavily bandaged hand and a specially designed club cast. Remarkably, he rebuilt his career. After multiple surgeries and rehab, he became productive again, recording double-digit sack seasons and eventually winning a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020. Teddy Bruschi. In February 2005, just days after playing in the Pro Bowl and weeks after winning his 3rd Super Bowl with the New England Patriots, linebacker Teddy Bruschi suffered a stroke at his home. He was only 31 years old. Doctors discovered he had a congenital heart defect, a hole between the chambers of his heart, known as a patent foramen ovale. The stroke left him temporarily with vision problems and partial paralysis, and for a moment, his football career was the least of his concerns. Survival was the focus. Bruschi spent months in rehab, relearning balance and motor skills. Many assumed his playing days were finished, but by October of that same year, against medical odds, he returned to the field. In his first game back, he recorded 10 tackles against the Buffalo Bills, showing the same relentless motor that made him a leader of New England's dynasty defenses. He played 4 more seasons before retiring in 2009. Ryan Clark. In 2007, Pittsburgh Steelers safety. Ryan Clark nearly lost his life because of a hidden medical condition. During a game in Denver's high altitude, Clark became severely ill. What doctors discovered was that his sickle cell trait, a genetic condition that can cause red blood cells to deform under stress, had triggered a dangerous reaction. The low oxygen levels at high elevation caused his blood cells to break down at an alarming rate, leading to organ damage. Clark's body went into crisis. His spleen and gallbladder had to be surgically removed, and he lost over 30 pounds during recovery. Doctors made it clear, if the condition hadn't been caught and treated quickly, it could have been fatal. For the rest of his career, Clark was barred from playing games in Denver, but he returned to the field in 2008 and went on to be a Pro Bowl safety, winning a Super Bowl with the Steelers and playing several more productive years. Trent Williams. In 2019, Washington offensive tackle Trent Williams revealed that what had first been dismissed as a minor growth on his head was actually a life-threatening cancer. Back in 2013, Williams noticed a small lump near his scalp. Team doctors initially told him it was benign and nothing to worry about. Over time, however, it grew larger and more painful. By 2019, after years of frustration, Williams sought outside medical advice. Tests confirmed it was dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, a rare, slow-growing form of cancer that can become fatal if left untreated. He underwent surgery to have the growth removed. Doctors told him he was lucky. If he had waited much longer, the cancer could have spread and become terminal. Williams later said he felt betrayed by Washington's medical staff, believing they had downplayed the seriousness of his condition for years. The ordeal caused him to miss the entire 2019 season and deepened his conflict with the franchise, eventually leading to a trade to the San Francisco 49ers. Williams returned to the field and re-established himself as the best left tackle in football. He became a perennial All-Pro, protecting quarterbacks well into his 30s. Ricardo Lockett. On November 1st, 2015, Seattle Seahawks wide receiver Ricardo Lockett's career and life nearly ended on a single play. During a punt return against the Dallas Cowboys, Lockett was blindsided by a devastating block. He collapsed face first onto the turf and didn't move. For long minutes, the stadium fell silent as medical personnel rushed to him. Lockett had suffered a serious neck injury, a disc and ligament damage that doctors later said could have killed him instantly if the impact had been even slightly different. He was carted off the field, stabilized, and immediately underwent neck surgery in Dallas. The operation saved his life, but ended his career. Lockett announced his retirement the following year, explaining that doctors warned him another hit could leave him permanently paralyzed, or worse. Zach Miller. On October 29, 2017, Chicago Bears tight end Zach Miller suffered one of the most frightening injuries the league has ever seen. In the third quarter against the New Orleans Saints, Miller leapt for what appeared to be a touchdown catch. As he landed, his left leg twisted awkwardly. He immediately collapsed, clutching his knee in agony. What looked like a routine dislocation turned out to be life-threatening. The violent injury had torn multiple ligaments, but more dangerously, it had damaged the popliteal artery behind his knee. Blood flow to his lower leg was almost completely cut off. Without rapid intervention, doctors said he could have lost the leg or his life. Miller was rushed into emergency vascular surgery in New Orleans, where surgeons repaired the artery and stabilized the leg. Over the following weeks, he underwent 9 surgeries to save the limb. Miraculously, doctors were able to restore blood flow and preserve his leg, though his football career was over. Miller officially retired in 2019. Dennis Byrd. On November 29, 1992, New York Jets defensive lineman Dennis Byrd's life was nearly cut short during a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Byrd was rushing the quarterback when he collided headfirst with a teammate. The impact fractured his C5 vertebrae and left him lying motionless on the turf. The stadium went silent as trainers rushed out, fearing the worst. He was immediately immobilized and taken to Lenox Hill Hospital in New York, where doctors performed surgery to stabilize his spine. For weeks, it was unclear if he would ever walk again. The injury ended his career on the spot, but survival and recovery became his new battle. Through extensive rehab, Byrd regained the ability to walk. Just a year later, he walked onto the field at the Meadowlands to a standing ovation, a moment that inspired teammates, fans, and players across the league. Byrd later wrote a book about his journey and became a motivational speaker. He tragically died in a car accident in 2016, but his legacy lives on as a symbol of perseverance. Kendrick Norton. On July 4, 2019, Miami Dolphins defensive tackle Kendrick Norton's NFL career changed forever. Early that morning in Miami, Norton was involved in a serious car accident that caused his truck to overturn. First responders worked quickly to free him from the wreckage, but his injuries were devastating. His left arm was crushed so severely that doctors had no choice but to amputate it in emergency surgery to save his life. At just 22 years old, Norton's football dreams were over. The accident ended his career before it had a chance to fully begin, but survival became the victory. The NFL and Dolphins supported him financially, and the league granted him full disability benefits. Norton later spoke openly about the crash, emphasizing gratitude rather than regret. He credited first responders and surgeons for giving him the chance to live and shifted his focus toward helping others. Eric Berry. In 2014, Kansas City Chiefs safety. Eric Berry's career took a sudden, frightening turn. During a late-season game, Berry complained of chest discomfort. Team doctors ordered tests, and results revealed a mass in his chest. Further evaluation confirmed it was Hodgkin's lymphoma, a type of cancer that can spread quickly if untreated. At just 25 years old, Berry's career was put on hold as he began chemotherapy. He lost weight, strength, and endured months of treatment. By July 2015, Berry announced he was cancer-free. He returned to training camp that summer and shocked everyone by regaining his Pro Bowl form immediately. That same year, he earned the NFL Comeback Player of the Year award, anchoring the Chiefs' defense once again. Berry went on to make 3 more Pro Bowls before injuries shortened his career. James Conner. In 2015, University of Pittsburgh running back James Conner faced a battle far tougher than anything on the football field. Conner had already proven himself as a star. In 2014, he rushed for 1,765 yards and 26 touchdowns, earning ACC Player of the Year. But in September 2015, he tore his MCL in the season opener. While rehabbing, he noticed persistent chest pain and fatigue. Doctors ran tests, and in December 2015, Conner was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. At just 20 years old, Conner's life was suddenly at risk. He began chemotherapy while continuing to train. He often described going from chemo sessions straight into workouts, determined not to lose the fight physically or mentally. By May 2016, he announced he was cancer-free. Just 4 months later, he returned to the field for Pitt, wearing a face mask shield to protect him from illness during recovery. That season, he rushed for over 1,000 yards and 20 total touchdowns, cementing his comeback. Conner went on to be drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he became their starting running back and earned a Pro Bowl selection in 2018. Ryan Shazier. On December 4, 2017, Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker Ryan Shazier suffered an injury that nearly cost him his life. In the first quarter against the Cincinnati Bengals, Shazier lowered his head to make a routine tackle. Immediately after contact, he grabbed at his back and rolled onto the turf. But this time, he didn't get up. His legs weren't moving. The stadium fell silent. Shazier had suffered a severe spinal contusion. He was rushed into emergency surgery to stabilize his spine, and doctors told him the reality. Survival was not guaranteed, and walking again was uncertain. For weeks, he battled partial paralysis and underwent intensive rehab just to regain basic movement. His football career ended that night, but Shazier's recovery became one of the most inspiring stories in modern sports. Less than a year later, he walked, slowly, carefully, across the stage at the NFL Draft to announce the Steelers' first-round pick, drawing tears and cheers from fans everywhere. Though he never returned to playing, Shazier turned his ordeal into a message of hope. He became a motivational figure, advocating for spinal injury awareness and proving that determination could overcome even the darkest odds. Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders has always been larger than life, but over the past few years, his battles off the field nearly cost him everything. In 2021, while serving as head coach at Jackson State, Sanders underwent surgery for a dislocated toe. What doctors discovered soon after was far worse. Dangerous blood clots were forming in his legs. The circulation issues became so severe that he developed compartment syndrome, and surgeons had to amputate 2 toes on his left foot to save his life. Multiple vascular procedures followed just to restore blood flow and prevent further damage. Even as he fought through those complications, another threat appeared. In early 2025, Sanders was diagnosed with bladder cancer after scans revealed a malignant tumor. He underwent a radical cystectomy, removing his bladder entirely and reconstructing a new one using part of his intestine. The surgery was brutal, but it saved his life. By mid-2025, doctors declared him cancer-free. Sanders later admitted the ordeal forced him to rethink everything: his health, his purpose, and the way he leads as a coach. Deion Sanders lost toes, battled through vascular surgeries, and beat cancer. And somehow, he's still on the sidelines today, proving that even legends have to fight just to survive. Patrick Mahomes. In May 2017, shortly after being drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes was the victim of an aggravated robbery attempt in Tyler, Texas. He and some friends had returned from a baseball game and pulled into a driveway when a vehicle blocked them in. A man exited, gesturing as if carrying a handgun, and demanded possessions from the group. Fortunately, no one was injured. Mahomes emerged physically unharmed after the ordeal. The suspect, Michael Pinkerton, later confessed to the robbery, and law enforcement arrested another man, Billy Ray Johnson, as part of the investigation. While the incident could have turned deadly, it ended without bodily harm, though the moment leaves a permanent mark on Mahomes' personal history. Brian Robinson Jr. In August 2022, rookie running back Brian Robinson Jr. was shot twice during an attempted robbery/carjacking in Washington, D.C. One bullet struck his hip, and another passed through his knee. He was hospitalized and underwent surgery. Fortunately, the bullets missed critical arteries and major ligaments, which likely saved his life and allowed his football career to continue. Robinson made a remarkable recovery. He returned to practice just weeks later and debuted in Week 5 of the season, going on to rush for 797 yards in 12 games. Earl Thomas. On August 11th, 2022, former NFL safety Earl Thomas's home in Orange, Texas, was engulfed by a catastrophic fire. Investigators determined that a lightning strike was the most likely cause. Thomas and two family members were inside when they heard a loud popping noise, indicative of lightning hitting the home, and spotted smoke before evacuating. Thankfully, all occupants escaped unharmed. Though no direct injury to Thomas was reported, the total loss of the home and the immediate danger of the blaze made it one of the more unusual, almost died moments involving a player. In December 2022, the Texas State Fire Marshal officially ruled the fire accidental and most likely caused by lightning, with no foul play suspected. Warren Sapp. In July 2016, Hall of Fame defensive lineman Warren Sapp was bitten by a shark while lobstering off the Florida Keys. He and a charter boat were exploring shallow water when Sapp reached into a crevice to grab a lobster. Reported by some witnesses to be about 4 feet long, latched onto Sapp's left forearm. The bite caused a gash to his forearm. He was treated quickly on location, wrapped up the wound, and returned to shore for further medical care. ESPN reported he was okay after the incident. While the shark bite was serious, it was not fatal, and Sapp recovered fully. His survival added a surreal chapter to his larger-than-life legacy, one that includes dominating the line of scrimmage, earning multiple Pro Bowls, and becoming one of the most colorful personalities in NFL history. Victor Cruz. On October 12, 2014, while playing for the New York Giants against the Eagles, Victor Cruz ruptured his right patellar tendon in a non-contact play near the corner of the end zone. The injury was catastrophic. Tears to the patellar tendon are rare and often career-threatening, especially for a receiver whose game depends on explosiveness and cutting. Cruz was immediately carted off the field. He missed the final 10 games of the season, underwent surgery, and was faced with a grueling rehabilitation process. While this injury was not a direct life-or-death incident like some others on the list, it ranks among the most serious and ominous for a skill position player. Many questioned whether Cruz would ever return to form, or even play again. He did eventually return to the field, but the injury forever altered the trajectory of his career. Reggie Bush. In November 2015, Reggie Bush was playing for the San Francisco 49ers when the unexpected struck. During a game at the Edward Jones Dome, he was pushed out of bounds and slipped on the concrete ring that lined the playing surface. As he slid into the wall, he tore his left meniscus, an injury severe enough to end his season. What made this injury more controversial and dangerous was the nature of the environment. Bush's legal team later argued that the concrete area immediately outside the field which they referred to as the concrete ring of death, contributed to the severity of the injury. They claimed it was a hazardous condition not present in most stadiums. The case went to trial in 2018. A jury held the Rams 100% liable and awarded Bush $12.45 million in damages, $4.95 million in compensatory, and $7.5 million in punitive, concluding that stadium negligence was responsible for turning a slip into a season-ending injury. Though the incident didn't directly threaten his life, it nearly ended his career under conditions he argued were beyond normal game risk. It became one of the most unusual legal fights in sports medicine, and a reminder that sometimes the field itself can be as dangerous as the hits. Myles Garrett. In 2022, Myles Garrett was involved in a single-vehicle crash. The defensive end's Porsche left the road, flipped multiple times, and came to rest off the roadway. He suffered a sprained shoulder, strained biceps, and cuts and bruises, but walked away from the wreck. While the crash was serious, it did not involve life-threatening injuries. But the violence of the rollover made it a scare. Garrett missed some time, but returned to continue his season. Dak Prescott. On October 11th, 2020, during a game against the New York Giants, Dak Prescott suffered a catastrophic ankle injury. His right ankle experienced a compound fracture and dislocation, forcing him off the field on a cart and ending his season. He underwent immediate surgery that night to repair the bones and clean the wound, and later had a second surgery to further stabilize the ankle and prevent long-term complications. Beyond the physical damage, there was real risk of infection, blood vessel injury, or complications from an open fracture. The recovery was long, grueling, and uncertain. Prescott missed the rest of the 2020 season, but he fought back. He was cleared in 2021 and returned to the field, eventually signing a big contract extension. Javid Best. Javid Best's NFL career with the Detroit Lions ended almost as soon as it began, and it was because of repeated, life-threatening concussions. Best entered the league in 2010 as a first-round pick out of Cal. He was blazing fast and explosive, scoring 4 touchdowns in his first 2 games as a rookie. But the concerns about his concussion history from college followed him into the NFL. In November 2011, while playing against the San Francisco 49ers, Best suffered a brutal concussion when he was hit mid-air and landed hard on the turf. He was carted off the field, and doctors immediately ruled him out. It was his second concussion of that season, and he never played again. Doctors warned that another head injury could have devastating, possibly fatal consequences. Best spent the next year on the physically unable to perform list, still experiencing symptoms like dizziness and headaches. By 2013, the Lions released him, and his NFL career was officially over after just 22 games. Joe Theismann. On November 18, 1985, Washington quarterback Joe Theismann suffered one of the most infamous and gruesome injuries in NFL history. During a Monday Night Football game against the New York Giants, Theismann called a flea flicker trick play. As he dropped back, linebacker Lawrence Taylor burst through the line and sacked him from behind. Taylor's weight drove Theismann's leg into the turf at a terrible angle, snapping both his tibia and fibula. The stadium went silent. Players on both teams immediately waved for medical help as Theismann lay on the ground with his lower leg grotesquely bent. Taylor, visibly shaken, knelt beside him until trainers arrived. Theismann was rushed into emergency surgery to stabilize the fractures. Doctors later confirmed it was a compound break with bone piercing the skin, the kind of injury that carries not only a career-ending prognosis, but also a risk of infection and life-threatening complications if not treated quickly. Although his leg was saved, Theismann never played football again. He retired at 36, finishing his career with a Super Bowl title and league MVP. Comment below what video you want to see next. Penn State's Forgotten Predator, 1978. Before Jerry Sandusky ever became a household name, Penn State already had a predator hiding within its football program. In 1978, linebacker Todd Hodney was a member of Joe Paterno's team. On the field, he barely made an impact. Off the field, he left scars that would last a lifetime. Hodney embarked on a violent spree of sexual assaults against women near campus. Authorities later described him as the most dangerous, physically imposing, and ruthless criminal they had ever encountered. His victims included students, young mothers, and women just walking home at night, all terrorized while Penn State football kept rolling toward national relevance. Hodney was eventually expelled from the team, but not before dozens of women had been attacked. After leaving Penn State, his crimes escalated. He was convicted of rape and years later of murder. For decades, his story was buried, overshadowed by Penn State's glory, years on the field, and later by the Sandusky scandal that defined the program's darkest chapter. When ESPN revisited Hodney's story more than 40 years later, it revealed a haunting truth. The warning signs had been there, but no one acted with the urgency needed to stop him. The program's silence left countless victims to suffer while football marched on. Northwestern's hazing disaster, 2023. In the summer of 2023, Northwestern and University, better known for academics than athletics, found itself at the center of one of college football's ugliest scandals. It started with whispers about hazing inside the Wildcats' locker room, but what came out publicly painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse. An internal investigation found a pattern of problematic conduct stretching across years. Former players described hazing rituals that included coerced sexual acts, degrading punishments, and forced nude drills. The allegations were shocking not only for their cruelty, but also for how normalized they had become inside the program. According to reports, some coaches allegedly signaled when hazing rituals were supposed to happen, while team leaders enforced them as a twisted rite of passage. What began as tradition crossed the line into humiliation and abuse, creating a culture where young players felt trapped, powerless to speak out for fear of being ostracized. At first, the university tried to quietly resolve it. Head coach Pat Fitzgerald, a Northwestern legend, was handed only a 2-week suspension. But when the graphic details leaked to the press, the outrage was immediate. Within days, Fitzgerald was fired after 17 years as head coach, and Northwestern's proud football reputation was in ruins. The scandal raised larger questions too. How could such toxic behavior persist for so long in a program celebrated for discipline and academics? It became a reminder that hazing isn't confined to small-time programs or obscure teams. Even elite universities can harbor a dark underbelly when accountability slips. Maryland's deadly workouts, 2018. In May 2018, the University of Maryland football program was shaken by a tragedy that should never have happened. During a grueling off-season conditioning session in the heat, 19-year-old offensive lineman Jordan McNair collapsed. Trainers initially treated it as simple exhaustion, but McNair wasn't just tired. He was in the early stages of heat stroke. For over an hour, his body temperature rose unchecked. Investigations later revealed the staff failed to administer the most basic and life-saving treatment, cold water immersion. By the time McNair was transported to the hospital, it was too late. He died 2 weeks later from complications of heat stroke. The aftermath was damning. Reports described a toxic culture under head coach DJ Durkin, one where players were driven through punishing workouts in a climate of fear. Speaking up meant being labeled weak, and even medical distress wasn't taken seriously. McNair's death wasn't just tragic, it was labeled preventable. The fallout was immediate and national. Durkin was placed on leave and eventually fired. Maryland's president publicly apologized to McNair's family. The university accepted full responsibility and later reached a $3.5 million settlement with his parents. But the deeper impact was bigger than Maryland. The incident forced college football to re-examine its training practices. The NCAA and athletic programs across the country implemented stricter workout protocols, emphasizing player safety and medical oversight. Notre Dame Tower Tragedy, 2010. On October 27, 2010, Notre Dame suffered a tragedy that had nothing to do with the field itself, but everything to do with the choices surrounding football. Declan Sullivan was a 20-year-old student videographer tasked with filming football practice. On that day, winds in South Bend were dangerously high, gusting over 50 miles per hour. Despite weather warnings, Sullivan was sent up on a scissor lift above the practice field to get overhead shots. As practice went on, the lift swayed violently. Sullivan tweeted from his phone, clearly terrified, I guess I've lived long enough. This is terrifying. Minutes later, the lift toppled. Sullivan was killed when it crashed to the ground. Investigations afterward found Notre Dame had ignored repeated warnings about the high winds. There were no safety measures in place to prevent a student worker from being put in such danger. The state of Indiana fined the university for safety violations, and the decision-making of head coach Brian Kelly and other administrators came under heavy scrutiny. The university eventually reached a settlement with Sullivan's family, but the damage was irreversible. His death was not the result of a violent hit or an on-field accident. It was the result of negligence, a choice to prioritize practice footage over basic safety. The Seberg suicide at Notre Dame, 2010. Just weeks after Declan Sullivan's death, Notre Dame faced another tragedy tied to its football program, one that raised even deeper questions about how the school protected its athletes versus how it protected its students. Elizabeth Lizzie Seberg was a 19-year-old student at nearby St. Mary's College. In August 2010, she reported to campus police that she had been sexually assaulted by a Notre Dame football player. The days that followed were filled with fear. Seberg received threatening text messages from another player, warning her not to pursue the complaint. Don't do anything you would regret. 10 days later, Lizzie Seberg died by suicide. The handling of the case drew immediate outrage. Campus police didn't interview the accused player until 15 days after Lizzie filed her report, and 5 days after her death. No charges were filed. Her parents later said they felt shut out by the university and misled about the progress of the investigation. To many observers, it looked like Notre Dame had prioritized protecting its football program over the life of a young woman. The tragedy became a rallying point in conversations about how universities address sexual assault, especially when athletes are involved. The imbalance of power, the delays in investigation, and the lack of transparency all left the impression of a system stacked against victims. The Booster from Hell, Miami's Nevin Shapiro, 2011. Few scandals in college football ever reached the level of salacious detail that came out of Miami in 2011. At the center of it all was Nevin Shapiro, a flashy South Florida businessman who ran a $930 million Ponzi scheme. While defrauding investors, he was also funneling millions into the Hurricanes football program as its self-proclaimed biggest booster. For nearly a decade, Shapiro provided Miami players with everything NCAA rules forbade: cash handouts, nightclub tabs, yacht parties, luxury hotel suites, jewelry, and even prostitutes. He once bragged about paying for an abortion for a player's girlfriend. According to Shapiro, as many as 72 players received improper benefits from him during the 2000s. He turned Miami's nightlife into an extension of the program, with VIP sections at clubs reserved for his players, stocked with champagne and attention. Players drove cars financed by Shapiro, stayed in his mansions, and lived like celebrities. To him, it wasn't just support, it was access. He wanted to be in the locker room, on the sidelines, and part of the Hurricanes' swagger. When his Ponzi scheme collapsed, Shapiro was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. From behind bars, he turned whistleblower, airing every detail of his decade-long relationship with Miami football. The NCAA launched an investigation, and while they couldn't prove every allegation, the damage was done. Miami imposed self-sanctions, including 2 bowl bans, and lost scholarships. The Hurricanes' reputation, once defined by dominance, became tainted by corruption. The Nevin Shapiro saga wasn't just a case of a rogue booster, it was a reminder of how easily the hunger for money, influence, and success can corrupt a program. Auburn players gunned down, 2012. On June 9, 2012, Auburn University was rocked by a tragedy that left the football community stunned. At an off-campus pool party near the school, an argument escalated into a shooting that claimed the lives of 2 former Auburn players and injured a current one. Ladarius Phillips and Ed Christian, both former Auburn linemen, were killed, while Eric Mack, a current offensive lineman, was critically wounded but survived. The shooter, a 22-year-old man with a violent history, opened fire after a dispute that reportedly started over a woman. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with dozens of students fleeing for cover as shots rang out. The suspect fled and sparked a manhunt that lasted several days before he surrendered to police. He was later convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The murders sent shockwaves through Auburn, a school still basking in the glow of its 2010 national championship. Candlelight vigils drew thousands, with coaches and teammates struggling to process how their community could lose young men so suddenly to senseless violence. The Marshall plane crash, 1970. On November 14, 1970, college football suffered its darkest day. Marshall University's football team had just played an away game at East Carolina and was flying home to Huntington, West Virginia. On board the chartered Southern Airways DC-9 were 75 people: players, coaches, staff, boosters, and flight crew. As the plane approached Tri-State Airport on a rainy, foggy night, it clipped trees just short of the runway. The aircraft slammed into a hillside and exploded. Every single person on board was killed. Among the dead were 36 Marshall players, 9 coaches, 25 boosters, and 5 crew members. The crash devastated Huntington. Families lost sons, fathers, and brothers all at once. The entire core of the Marshall football program was wiped out. University officials even considered shutting the program down altogether. The grief was that overwhelming, but in the end, Marshall chose to rebuild. With the help of students, walk-ons, and transfers from other schools, the Thundering Herd fielded a team the following season. Though they struggled on the field for years afterward, the decision to keep playing became a symbol of resilience. The tragedy was later memorialized in the film We Are Marshall, but no movie can fully capture the pain of an entire team and community gone in an instant. The 1970 Marshall plane crash remains perhaps the most haunting moment in college football history, a story of unthinkable loss, and of a university and town that somehow found a way to carry on. UVA shooting on campus, 2022. On November 13, 2022, the University of Virginia experienced one of the darkest tragedies in college football history. A group of students, including several football players, were returning to campus on a charter bus after a class trip. What should have been an ordinary Sunday night turned into horror. A former UVA player, also a student at the university, allegedly opened fire on the bus. 3 football players, Lavelle Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry, were killed. 2 other students were wounded. The attack was sudden and shocking, leaving their teammates and classmates traumatized. The shooter fled, sparking a tense 12-hour campus lockdown while police searched for him. He was eventually arrested the following morning, but by then, the Charlottesville community was in mourning. Candlelight vigils drew thousands of people. Teammates, coaches, and family members spoke of the 3 victims not just as athletes, but as beloved sons, brothers, and friends. In the weeks that followed, details emerged that the shooter had been on UVA's radar for prior behavioral and weapon-related issues. That only deepened the sense of frustration and disbelief. How could warning signs have been missed? And how could such violence erupt within a close-knit team environment? The remainder of Virginia's football season was canceled, an acknowledgement that there were bigger things than games to be addressed. The university instead turned its focus toward grieving, honoring the players' legacies, and healing as a community. Northern Colorado's murderous punter, 2006. In 2006, Northern Colorado University, a small program that rarely made national headlines, suddenly became infamous for a crime that sounded more like a tabloid story than a sports headline. Mitch Kozad, a backup punter desperate to earn the starting job, decided the only way to move up the depth chart was to eliminate his competition. One night in September, starting punter Rafael Mendoza was walking to his car in a dark campus parking lot when a masked attacker ambushed him. Mendoza was stabbed in his kicking leg, the very leg he used to punt. He survived, though badly wounded, and investigators quickly zeroed in on Kozad. The motive was as bizarre as it was chilling. He wanted the starting spot so badly that he literally tried to disable his rival. The case became national news, and Kozad was soon dubbed the punter who stabbed his competition. In 2007, he was convicted of second-degree assault, though the jury deadlocked on the more serious attempted murder charge, and sentenced to prison. Mendoza, meanwhile, eventually recovered but never regained his starting role at Northern Colorado. For a program that had little national visibility, the crime cast a long shadow. It exposed the extreme pressures and warped priorities that can emerge in even the smallest corners of college football. A position battle that should have been settled on the practice field instead turned into a true crime story that stained Northern Colorado's name. Army's cheating catastrophe, 1951. In 1951, one of the most respected institutions in America, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was brought to its knees by a scandal that shattered both its football program and its honor code. That year, it was revealed that 90 cadets, including 37 football players, had systematically cheated on exams. At West Point, the honor code was sacred. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. The scandal showed just how far some were willing to go to keep star athletes on the field. Cadets had been circulating stolen exam answers and recycled test questions. Tutors were suspected of helping athletes bend rules, and the culture around the football team had allowed the cheating to spread unchecked. When the truth came out, the punishment was unprecedented. Every cadet involved was expelled. The impact on Army football was immediate and devastating. Just years earlier, the Black Knights had been a national powerhouse, producing legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis. But with nearly the entire varsity roster dismissed, the 1951 team stumbled to a 2-7 record. What had once been a symbol of discipline and excellence became a cautionary tale. The scandal also shook the public's faith in West Point itself. Congress debated whether football had compromised the Academy's mission, with some even calling for the program to be suspended entirely. Ultimately, Army football survived, but the cribbing scandal scarred its reputation for decades. Woody Hayes' sideline assault, 1978. Woody Hayes was already a legend by the late 1970s, the face of Ohio State football, a Hall of Fame coach with 5 national championships, and a fiery personality who commanded both fear and respect. But on December 29, 1978, his legendary career ended in one shocking moment during the Gator Bowl. With 2 minutes left in a tense game against Clemson, Ohio State quarterback Art Schlichter threw an interception. Clemson's Charlie Bauman picked off the pass and was tackled along the Buckeyes' sideline. As Bauman got to his feet, Woody Hayes, furious and unable to control his temper, grabbed the opposing player by the jersey and punched him in the throat. The punch was caught by TV cameras and replayed across the country. Players and coaches rushed in to separate the melee, but the damage was done. Hayes, a 65-year-old icon of the sport, had struck an opposing student athlete on live television. The very next morning, Ohio State officials fired him. After 28 years as head coach, his career ended not with a championship or a farewell, but with disgrace. The incident became one of the most infamous coaching meltdowns in sports history. It overshadowed Clemson's 17-15 victory and permanently scarred Hayes' legacy. Though remembered for his brilliance and success, he's equally remembered for the violent outburst that ended his career. 1905, football's deadliest season. In 1905, college football nearly destroyed itself. The sport was wildly popular, but brutally dangerous. With no forward pass, players clashed in violent mass formations, like the Flying Wedge, essentially turning scrimmages into organized brawls. Helmets were primitive, protective gear was minimal, and refereeing was inconsistent. That year, the violence reached a breaking point. By the end of the 1905 season, at least 19 players were dead, and another 137 seriously injured. Fatalities included skull fractures, spinal cord injuries, and internal bleeding, tragedies that often involved teenagers barely out of high school. Newspapers dubbed it a death harvest, and public opinion began to turn against the game. One emblematic incident was the death of Union College halfback Harold Moore, who died of a brain hemorrhage after being kicked in the head during a game against NYU. His death and others fueled outrage across the country, with editorials calling football gladiatorial combat in disguise. The national outcry reached the White House. President Theodore Roosevelt, an outspoken fan of the sport, convened a summit with college leaders. He gave them an ultimatum: reform the rules or risk seeing football banned altogether. The result was a series of landmark changes in 1906. The forward pass was legalized, mass plays like the wedge were abolished, a neutral line of scrimmage was created, and more emphasis was placed on player safety. These reforms saved the sport, laying the foundation for modern football. WSU's quarterback, suicide, and CTE, 2018. In January 2018, Washington State University quarterback Tyler Hilinski was found dead in his apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Just 21 years old, Hilinski had started in the Holiday Bowl weeks earlier and was widely expected to take over as the Cougars' full-time starter the following season. His death shocked teammates, fans, and the entire college football world. At first, it was a mystery. Hilinski had seemed cheerful, hardworking, and beloved by those around him. There were no obvious warning signs, but the questions grew louder. How could a young man with such promise reach such a devastating breaking point? The answers came after his family agreed to have his brain examined. The autopsy revealed Hilinski had stage 1 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. Doctors were stunned. They told the family that his brain looked like that of a man decades older, possibly in his 60s. His parents have said they don't blame football alone, but they believe the disease, combined with the pressures of being a quarterback, contributed to his depression. His younger brother, Ryan, later became a quarterback at South Carolina and Northwestern, playing in his brother's honor, while also raising awareness about mental health. In the wake of Tyler's death, his family founded Hilinski's Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to ending the stigma around mental illness in athletes and improving support systems on campuses. His story became a rallying cry for more open conversations about concussions, CTE, and the invisible battles young athletes face. Minnesota's boycott and sexual assault saga, 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota football program was engulfed in a dark and complicated scandal that blurred the lines between justice, discipline, and loyalty. It began when a female student accused multiple Gopher players of sexually assaulting her at an off-campus party in September. Police investigated, but ultimately did not pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. However, the university launched its own Title IX investigation, and its findings told a different story. The inquiry determined that the woman's account was credible, and that at least 10 players had violated conduct codes related to sexual assault and harassment. In December, right before Minnesota was set to play in the Holiday Bowl, the university announced the suspensions of those 10 players. The team's response was explosive. Players held a press conference, announcing a full boycott of all practices and games, even threatening not to play in the bowl. They framed it as a stand for due process, claiming their teammates were punished without a fair trial in court. But then, the 82-page Title IX report was released to the public, detailing graphic allegations of group assault and corroborating parts of the victim's story. Once the disturbing details became public, the boycott crumbled. Support for the players' protest evaporated, and within 2 days, the team ended its standoff. In the end, 4 players were expelled. Others were suspended, and the program's reputation was badly damaged. The Holiday Bowl went ahead, but the scandal left a permanent stain. Jerry Rice, Stickum admission. Jerry Rice is widely regarded as the greatest football player of all time. The records he holds as a wide receiver, 1,549 receptions, 22,895 yards, 197 touchdowns, may never be touched. But even Rice has a controversy that fans still debate today. In 2015, years after he retired, Rice admitted in an interview that he had used Stickum, an adhesive substance banned by the NFL in 1981, to help catch passes. Stickum was notorious in the 1970s for making footballs tacky and easier to grip. Players like Fred Biletnikoff and Lester Hayes used it so much that the league outlawed it entirely. Rice said, "I know this might be a little illegal, but I used a little Stickum." The confession sparked a wave of backlash. How much of his legendary production was aided by something that had been banned for decades? Could the greatest wide receiver of all time have broken those records without it? Rice later downplayed the comment, insisting it was just occasional use and not a defining part of his game. Still, the admission created a permanent asterisk in the eyes of some fans. O.J. Simpson, double murder trial. Few NFL legends have ever seen their careers and reputations eclipsed by scandal the way O.J. Simpson did. On the field, he was unstoppable. the first player in history to rush for over 2,000 yards in a 14-game season, a 6-time Pro Bowler, and a Hall of Famer. Off the field, he was a cultural icon, transitioning seamlessly into acting, commercials, and broadcasting. By the late 1980s, OJ was a household name in America, but in 1994, everything changed. Simpson was arrested and charged with the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman. The case became the trial of the century, dominating national headlines for over a year. The infamous slow-speed chase in his white Ford Bronco was watched live by 95 million Americans, a surreal spectacle that cemented the trial as a defining moment of the decade. In 1995, Simpson was acquitted of murder after a defense strategy that challenged the credibility of the LAPD and raised doubts about evidence handling. The jury's decision shocked much of the public, dividing opinion largely along racial and cultural lines. While legally free, Simpson's image as a beloved football icon was shattered. Later, in a civil trial, he was found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman and ordered to pay $33.5 million to their families, money he never fully paid. Decades later, Simpson also served prison time for armed robbery and kidnapping in a separate case, further deepening his fall from grace. Lawrence Taylor, drugs and legal troubles. Lawrence Taylor is often called the greatest defensive player in NFL history. Drafted by the New York Giants in 1981, he revolutionized the linebacker position, terrorizing quarterbacks with unmatched speed and power. He won 2 Super Bowls, 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and an MVP, something almost unheard of for a defensive player. But Taylor's dominance on the field was matched by chaos off it. Throughout his career, he battled a highly publicized drug addiction. By his own admission, cocaine and partying were part of his lifestyle even while he was playing at an elite level. In 1988, he tested positive for cocaine, and by 1991, he was suspended for failing drug tests multiple times. His talent kept him on the field, but his reputation began to unravel. After retirement, things only got worse. In 1998, he was arrested for attempting to buy cocaine from undercover officers. In 2009, he was charged with hit and run. Then, in 2010, he faced his most serious legal issue. He was indicted on charges related to a sexual encounter with a 16-year-old girl. Taylor pled guilty to misdemeanor charges of sexual misconduct and patronizing a prostitute, narrowly avoiding jail time but taking another massive hit to his reputation. For many, Taylor's legacy is a contradiction. On the field, he is remembered as one of the most fearsome and influential defenders in NFL history, a player who changed the way the game is played. Off the field, his name became synonymous with excess, addiction, and scandal. Adrian Peterson, child abuse case. Adrian Peterson was one of the most dominant running backs of his era, known for his combination of speed, vision, and punishing strength. A league MVP in 2012, he was widely considered a generational talent and a lock for Canton. But in 2014, his Hall of Fame career was overshadowed by a controversy that went far beyond football. That year, Peterson was indicted in Texas on charges of recklessly or negligently injuring a child. The case stemmed from his disciplining of his 4-year-old son with a wooden switch, which left visible bruises and cuts on the child's body. When photos surfaced, the images sparked nationwide outrage. Peterson insisted that he was following the same form of discipline he had received growing up, saying he never intended to harm his child. But critics argued that what he called discipline crossed the line into abuse. The case ignited a national debate on corporal punishment, parenting, and where cultural practices collide with modern standards of child safety. The NFL placed Peterson on the exempt list, effectively barring him from playing while the case was resolved. He later pled no contest to misdemeanor reckless assault and avoided jail time, but the damage was already done. He missed almost the entire 2014 season, lost millions in salary and endorsements, and his reputation never fully recovered. Peterson eventually returned to the NFL and continued to put up strong numbers, but the child abuse case became the defining controversy of his career. Warren Sapp, solicitation arrest and bankruptcy. Warren Sapp was one of the most dominant defensive tackles of his generation, a Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, and the face of Tampa Bay's historic defense in the early 2000s. Sapp's on-field resume is as decorated as any lineman in NFL history. But after his retirement, his legacy became clouded by financial collapse and legal scandals. In 2012, just 2 years after being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Sapp filed for bankruptcy, despite earning an estimated $82 million during his career. Court filings showed he was millions in debt, owing money to the IRS, child support, and creditors. Among the assets listed were hundreds of pairs of Air Jordans, expensive jewelry, and even his Super Bowl ring. It became one of the most shocking examples of how fast NFL fortunes can vanish. Then came the arrest. In 2015, while working as an analyst for the NFL Network, Sapp was arrested in Phoenix during Super Bowl week on charges of soliciting a prostitute and assault. He was quickly fired from the network, and though some of the charges were later dropped, the damage to his reputation was immediate and severe. Sapp's controversies painted a stark contrast with his Hall of Fame career. He had been a larger-than-life figure on the field, dominant, brash, and unrelenting. Off the field, however, his financial struggles and legal issues made him a cautionary tale of how quickly fame and fortune can crumble. Michael Vick, dogfighting scandal. Michael Vick was one of the most electrifying quarterbacks the NFL had ever seen. Drafted number 1 overall by the Atlanta Falcons in 2001, he completely changed the position, combining a rocket arm with video game-level running ability. He became a Pro Bowler, the face of the Falcons, and one of the league's most marketable stars. But in 2007, his entire career and reputation collapsed in one of the NFL's most infamous scandals. That year, federal investigators uncovered that Vick was financing and operating an illegal dogfighting ring called Bad News Kennels on a property he owned in Virginia. The details were gruesome. Dogs were trained to fight to the death, and those that lost were often killed in brutal ways. When the evidence came out, the NFL suspended him indefinitely, and his endorsements with Nike and others evaporated overnight. Vick eventually pled guilty to federal felony charges. He was sentenced to 23 months in prison, making him the first superstar quarterback to serve time in federal prison at the height of his career. The fallout cost him tens of millions in salary, endorsements, and the prime years of his playing career. When Vick was released in 2009, he attempted a comeback with the Philadelphia Eagles. To the surprise of many, he found redemption on the field, winning NFL Comeback Player of the Year in 2010 and leading the Eagles to the playoffs. Off the field, he dedicated himself to animal rights advocacy, working with groups like the Humane Society to speak out against dogfighting. Randy Moss, I Play When I Want To, and Legal Trouble. Randy Moss is one of the most gifted wide receivers to ever play in the NFL. His speed, size, and playmaking ability made him nearly unstoppable, and his 156 career touchdowns still rank among the most in league history. But throughout his career, Moss was also surrounded by controversy, both on and off the field. One of the defining moments of his reputation came in 2001 while playing for the Minnesota Vikings. After being criticized for taking plays off, Moss famously told reporters, "I play when I want to play." The quote became a permanent label, painting him as a player with unmatched talent but questionable effort. Even though Moss later clarified that he gave his all in games, the comment fueled a perception that he coasted at times, relying on his natural rather than constant effort. Moss also had several legal issues that followed him early in his career. In 2002, he was arrested after using his car to bump a traffic control officer during a dispute, an incident that resulted in misdemeanor charges and fines. Earlier in his college years, he had already dealt with arrests tied to marijuana possession and a probation violation. Combined, these incidents built a narrative that Moss was a troublemaker, an image that clashed with his brilliance on the field. Despite the controversies, Moss's talent was undeniable. He set the rookie record for touchdowns in 1998 with 17, redefined deep passing games in New England in 2007 with 23 more, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2018. Ray Lewis, 2000 murder trial. Ray Lewis is remembered as one of the most dominant linebackers in NFL history, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, 13-time Pro Bowler, and the heart of the Baltimore Ravens defense for nearly 2 decades, his on-field resume is legendary. But his career was almost derailed by one of the most shocking off-field controversies the league has ever seen. After Super Bowl 34 in January 2000, Lewis was in Atlanta celebrating at a nightclub. In the early hours of the morning, a fight broke out outside the club that ended with 2 men, Jacinth Baker and Richard Lawler, being stabbed to death. Lewis and 2 companions were charged with murder. The case became a media firestorm. Lewis, already one of the NFL's biggest stars, was suddenly facing the possibility of life in prison. During the trial, prosecutors alleged that Lewis and his friends were involved in the brawl that led to the killings. But the evidence against Lewis was thin. He eventually reached a plea deal. The murder charges were dropped in exchange for pleading guilty to obstruction of justice for misleading investigators. Lewis was sentenced to a year of probation, fined $250,000 by the NFL, and agreed to testify against his 2 companions. Both of them were later acquitted. To this day, the full truth about what happened that night remains unclear, and Lewis has always maintained his innocence regarding the murders. The controversy left a permanent shadow over his career. When he led the Ravens to a Super Bowl victory just a year later and was named MVP of the game, many still remembered the trial. Some saw his redemption arc as inspirational. Others believed the case left too many unanswered questions. Ben Roethlisberger, sexual assault allegations. Ben Roethlisberger, the longtime quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, was one of the most successful signal callers of his generation. A 2-time Super Bowl champion and eventual Hall of Famer, his career was defined by clutch performances and toughness. But off the field, his legacy was tainted by a series of serious allegations that followed him early in his career. The first came in 2009, when a woman working at a Nevada hotel accused Ben Roethlisberger of sexual assault. He denied the claims, and the case was settled in civil court years later. But the accusation raised the first questions about his behavior away from football. Just a year later, in March 2010, a second allegation emerged. A 20-year-old college student accused Ben Roethlisberger of sexual assault in a nightclub bathroom in Milledgeville, Georgia. Though prosecutors ultimately declined to press charges due to lack of sufficient evidence, the case drew massive media attention. Witness accounts and the details of the investigation painted an unsettling picture, even without a conviction. The NFL responded by suspending Ben Roethlisberger 6 games for violating the league's personal conduct policy, though it was later reduced to 4. Commissioner Roger Goodell made it clear the suspension wasn't about criminal charges. It was about a pattern of behavior that reflected poorly on the league. Ben Roethlisberger eventually repaired his image in Pittsburgh by keeping a low profile, embracing leadership roles, and continuing to win games. But for many, the allegations remained a permanent blemish on his reputation. Tom Brady, Deflategate. Tom Brady is the most decorated quarterback in NFL history, 7 Super Bowls, 3 MVPs, and a resume that cements him as the GOAT in the eyes of many. But in 2015, his legacy was dragged into one of the league's most infamous controversies, Deflategate. It began during the AFC Championship game between the New England Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts. Colts defenders complained that the footballs Brady was using seemed underinflated, making them easier to grip in the cold, rainy conditions. The NFL investigated, and the Wells report concluded it was more probable than not that Patriots staffers intentionally deflated the balls, and that Brady was aware of it. The fallout was massive. The Patriots were fined $1 million, stripped of a first and fourth round draft pick, and Brady was suspended 4 games to start the 2016 season. Brady fought the suspension in court for months, initially winning in federal court before an appeals court reinstated the punishment. The saga turned into a media circus. Supporters said the NFL's evidence was flimsy and the punishment was excessive, especially since deflation had little measurable impact on performance. Critics argued that it fit a pattern of the Patriots bending rules for an edge, from Spygate to sideline controversies. When Brady finally served his suspension, he came back with a vengeance. He led the Patriots to a Super Bowl win that very season, the famous 28-3 comeback against Atlanta, cementing his status as untouchable on the field. Brett Favre. Welfare fund scandal.
Brett Favre
is one of the most beloved quarterbacks in NFL history, a Super Bowl champion, three-time MVP, and the NFL's all-time leader in nearly every passing category when he retired. For decades, his image was tied to small-town grit, playing through pain and his aw-shucks personality. But in retirement, Favre's name became linked to one of the ugliest scandals in Mississippi history. In 2020, investigators revealed that Favre had received millions of dollars connected to a massive welfare fraud case in Mississippi, the largest public embezzlement scheme in the state's history. The scheme misused at least $77 million in funds intended to help some of the state's poorest residents. Favre's involvement centered on two areas. He was paid $1.1 million for speeches he never delivered. He allegedly pushed for $5 million in welfare funds to be used to build a volleyball facility at the University of Southern Mississippi, where his daughter played. When the news broke, Favre claimed he didn't know the money came from welfare programs and said he repaid the $1.1 million once it came to light. But text messages later released showed him asking officials if the media could ever find out where the money came from, casting doubt on his denials. While Favre has not been criminally charged, the controversy has badly damaged his reputation. Mississippi's state auditor and civil lawsuits continue to seek recovery of millions of dollars misused in the scheme, including funds tied to Favre's projects. Peyton Manning, college sexual misconduct allegation. Peyton Manning is often remembered as the NFL's golden boy, a five-time MVP, two-time Super Bowl champion, and one of the smartest quarterbacks to ever play the game. His image has long been tied to professionalism and clean-cut leadership. But early in his life, back in 1996 while at the University of Tennessee, Manning was involved in a controversy that continues to follow him. The incident centered on a female athletic trainer at Tennessee, Dr. Jamie Nawright, who accused Manning of sexual harassment. She claimed that during a training room exam, Manning exposed himself and pressed his genitals against her face while joking around. Manning denied the allegation, insisting it was a mooning prank aimed at a teammate, not Nawright. The university conducted an internal inquiry, and Nawright later settled a lawsuit with the school, receiving a financial settlement and resigning from her position. The controversy largely faded from public view until years later. In 2003, Manning and his father Archie co-authored a book in which they discussed the incident and described Nawright in disparaging terms. She responded by suing both Peytons and others for defamation, saying the book damaged her reputation and misrepresented what happened. That case also ended in a confidential settlement. Though Manning went on to have a legendary NFL career and maintained his squeaky clean image for most fans, the allegations resurfaced during the mid-2010s, when public attention to sexual misconduct cases in sports and media brought renewed scrutiny. Cam Newton, sexist comment to reporter. Cam Newton was one of the NFL's brightest stars in the mid-2000s. A league MVP in 2015, he led the Carolina Panthers to a Super Bowl appearance and became one of the most marketable faces of the sport. But in 2017, he sparked a controversy that damaged his image far beyond the field. During a press conference, Charlotte Observer reporter Jordan Rodrigue asked Newton about wide receiver Devin Funchess' route running. Newton smirked and responded, "It's funny to hear a female talk about routes. It's funny." The comment was instantly criticized as sexist and dismissive. In an era where women were finally beginning to gain more visibility in sports media, Newton's words were seen as reinforcing outdated stereotypes that women couldn't seriously analyze the game. The backlash was swift. Fans, fellow athletes, and media members condemned the remark, and Rodrigue herself called it extremely discouraging. Sponsors reacted too. Yogurt giant Dannon dropped Newton from its advertising campaigns almost immediately, citing the comment as unacceptable. Newton later issued a public apology, saying his words were extremely degrading and disrespectful, and admitting that he had failed to show proper respect to female reporters. Still, the incident left a stain on his public persona, especially among those who had viewed him as one of the NFL's most charismatic leaders. Reggie White, 1998 speech controversy. Reggie White was one of the most dominant defensive linemen in NFL history, nicknamed the Minister of Defense, for both his play and his work as an ordained minister. On the field, he was nearly unmatched, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 13-time Pro Bowler, and Super Bowl champion. Off the field, however, one moment in 1998 sparked a national firestorm. That year, White was invited to speak before the Wisconsin State Legislature. What was expected to be a ceremonial speech from a respected athlete turned into one of the most controversial public addresses ever delivered by a sports figure. In his remarks, White made comments about race, religion, and homosexuality that were widely criticized as offensive and insensitive. He referred to homosexuality as a sin and said it was wrong for the government to endorse it. He also made sweeping generalizations about different racial and ethnic groups, suggesting each had distinct God-given roles or characteristics, stereotypes that offended many. The backlash was immediate. White's words drew criticism from civil rights leaders, advocacy groups, fans, and the media. Corporate sponsors took notice as well. Nike scaled back promotions featuring him, and CBS Sports dropped plans to hire him as an analyst, citing concerns about the fallout. White later insisted that his comments were rooted in his religious beliefs and not intended to be hateful, but the damage to his public image was done. For many, it created a permanent divide between the respected Hall of Famer on the field and the controversial figure off it. Antonio Brown, behavioral meltdowns and lawsuits. Antonio Brown's career is one of the most dramatic rises and falls in NFL history. At his peak, Brown was the best wide receiver in the league. From 2013 to 2018 with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he led the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns, earning 4 first-team All-Pro honors. On the field, he was nearly unstoppable. Off the field, however, his career unraveled in a storm of controversies. The problems began in Pittsburgh, where clashes with quarterback Ben Roethlisberger and head coach Mike Tomlin led to a messy exit. After forcing his way out, Brown landed with the Raiders in 2019, but never played it down. He feuded with management over fines, missed practices, and even threatened GM Mike Mayock. The team released him before the season began. From there, Brown's controversies piled up. New England stint, 2019, signed by the Patriots, but released after just 1 game following sexual assault allegations from a former trainer and a separate accusation of sexual misconduct. Tampa Bay, 2020 to 2021, joined Tom Brady and won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers, but his tenure ended abruptly. In a bizarre scene in 2022, Brown removed his pads mid-game against the Jets, tossed his shirt into the crowd, and jogged off the field. The meltdown effectively ended his NFL career. Lawsuits and legal troubles. Brown faced multiple civil suits, including sexual assault allegations, unpaid wages to staff, and property damage claims. He was also arrested in 2020 for assaulting a moving truck driver. Brown's downfall was a mix of self-sabotage and legal chaos. What should have been a first-ballot Hall of Fame career became a cautionary tale. Instead of being remembered solely for his brilliance, Brown is now defined as much by his controversies as by his numbers. Terrell Owens, locker room drama and bankruptcy. Terrell Owens was one of the most electrifying wide receivers in NFL history. With nearly 16,000 receiving yards, 153 touchdowns, and a career that spanned 15 seasons, his production ranked him among the all-time greats. But just as famous as his highlight reel catches were his controversies, both inside the locker room and after his career ended. On the field, Owens was a star. Off it, he developed a reputation as a disruptive teammate. He clashed publicly with quarterbacks Jeff Garcia in San Francisco, Donovan McNabb in Philadelphia, and Tony Romo in Dallas. His criticisms often played out in the media. One of the most infamous came when Owens openly questioned McNabb's toughness after Super Bowl 39, where the Eagles lost to the Patriots. The tension eventually led Philadelphia to suspend him mid-season in 2005, a shocking move for a team still in contention. But the drama didn't stop with quarterbacks. Owens frequently sparred with coaches, front offices, and media members. His touchdown celebrations, from dancing on the Cowboys star to pulling a Sharpie out of his sock, made him one of the most polarizing figures in the league. Fans either loved him or hated him, and his presence often divided locker rooms. After retiring, Owens faced a new battle: finances. Despite earning over $80 million in his career, he filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Court documents showed heavy losses from failed investments, lavish spending, and large child support obligations. Owens admitted he had trusted the wrong advisors and lived beyond his means, leaving him struggling to stay afloat once the NFL checks stopped coming. Jim Brown, multiple assault allegations. Jim Brown is widely celebrated as one of the greatest football players in history. A 3-time MVP, 8-time rushing champion, and still the Cleveland Browns' all-time leading rusher, he retired in 1965 at just 29 years old, still at the peak of his powers. Off the field, he became an actor, activist, and cultural icon, praised for his leadership during the civil rights movement. But Brown's personal life was also marked by a long series of disturbing controversies. From the 1960s onward, Brown faced numerous allegations of assault and domestic violence. In 1965, he was charged with assault and battery against an 18-year-old woman, though the case was later dismissed. In 1968, he was accused of throwing a woman off a balcony, a charge that could have ended his career, but she refused to testify, and the case collapsed. Over the next 3 decades, he was arrested multiple times in incidents involving women, including accusations of beating and threatening partners. Perhaps the most high-profile case came in 1999 when Brown smashed his wife's car with a shovel during an argument. He was convicted of misdemeanor vandalism and sentenced to 6 months in jail after refusing court-ordered counseling. Brown consistently denied many of the allegations and often accused the media of trying to tarnish his image. Some charges were dropped or dismissed, but the repeated pattern of accusations left a shadow over his legacy. Despite the controversies, Brown remained active in community programs and social justice work, particularly focused on urban violence and mentoring young men. Yet his history of alleged abuse continues to complicate how he's remembered. Chad Johnson, Ocho Cinco, domestic violence arrest. Chad Johnson, better known as Ocho Cinco, was one of the NFL's most charismatic wide receivers. Famous for his flashy touchdown celebrations, larger-than-life personality, and elite production on the field, he became a fan favorite during his years with the Cincinnati Bengals. But his career came to an abrupt and tragic halt in 2012 due to an off-field scandal. That summer, Johnson had just signed with the Miami Dolphins, hoping to revive his career after a short stint in New England. But only weeks into training camp, he was arrested for domestic violence after allegedly headbutting his wife, reality TV star Evelyn Lozada, during an argument. Lozada required stitches, and the case quickly made national headlines. The Dolphins released Johnson the very next day. The NFL later suspended him, and teams across the league kept their distance. For a player who had built a career on both talent and entertainment value, the arrest marked an immediate and permanent downfall. Johnson eventually pled no contest to misdemeanor domestic battery and served probation, but his reputation never recovered. He later admitted that the incident was the lowest point of his life, acknowledging that his actions had cost him both his career and his marriage. Tony Romo, criticism for partying in Cabo. Tony Romo spent more than a decade as the face of the Dallas Cowboys, breaking franchise passing records and becoming one of the most recognizable quarterbacks in the league. But one moment from 2008 remains one of the most talked about controversies of his career. And it didn't even happen on the field. Heading into the NFC divisional round of the playoffs, the Cowboys were the top seed in the NFC. Romo, along with then-girlfriend Jessica Simpson and teammate Jason Witten, was spotted vacationing in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico during the team's bye week. Photos quickly surfaced, showing Romo relaxing on the beach just days before what was supposed to be the Cowboys' biggest playoff push in over a decade. When Dallas went on to lose their first playoff game to the New York Giants, a game in which Romo threw a late interception, the criticism was immediate and harsh. Fans and media blasted him for being distracted and not focused enough on the postseason. Jessica Simpson was unfairly dragged into the storm too, labeled by some fans as a distraction, in the same way Yoko Ono was once blamed for breaking up the Beatles. Romo defended himself, saying the short trip had nothing to do with the team's loss, and many teammates backed him up.
Still, the Cabo trip stuck to his reputation for years.
fueling the narrative that Romo was a talented quarterback who couldn't win the big games. In hindsight, the incident seems trivial compared to real scandals involving other stars. But for Romo, it became a defining controversy.
Every NFL player who got life sentences explained. Aaron Hernandez, life without parole. Aaron Hernandez's downfall isn't just the most shocking criminal case in NFL history. It's one of the most terrifying collapses of any professional athlete, period. Not because of one mistake, not because of a bad night, but because the evidence suggests a man who lived a double life long before the cameras ever found him. Hernandez was a 23-year-old rising star for the New England Patriots, a Pro Bowl-level tight end with a $40 million contract and a spot in the league's most disciplined organization. To the public, he was charismatic, intense, and competitive. Behind the scenes, prosecutors would later argue he was something else entirely. The case that sent him away for life began on June 17, 2013, when the body of Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, was found in an industrial park less than a mile from Hernandez's home. Lloyd had been shot multiple times. Investigators moved fast. Security footage, cell phone data, tire tracks, and ballistic evidence all pointed back to Hernandez. The pattern wasn't subtle, it was overwhelming. Key elements the jury saw. Hernandez picked Lloyd up the night he was killed. Home surveillance footage showed Hernandez holding a gun shortly before and after the murder. Shell casings at the scene matched casings found in Hernandez's rental car. Text messages tied Hernandez directly to the timeline. The motive? Prosecutors argued Hernandez believed Lloyd knew too much about Hernandez's involvement in a prior double homicide, a case Hernandez would later be tried for and acquitted of. But for Odin Lloyd, the jury didn't hesitate. First-degree murder, mandatory life sentence, no possibility of parole. During the trial, a different picture of Hernandez emerged. Not the talented tight end with a troubled past, but a man prosecutors said lived a secret world of violence. Evidence suggested Hernandez maintained criminal associations even after signing his massive contract. His home was filled with surveillance equipment, guns, security measures that made no sense for a football star, but made perfect sense for someone expecting retaliation. Then came the revelations about Hernandez's mental state. After his death in 2017, researchers at Boston University discovered he had the most severe case of CTE ever recorded in someone his age, stage 3, in a 27-year-old, a level usually seen in elderly dementia patients or long-retired boxers. The damage was catastrophic. It didn't excuse his actions, but it raised brutal questions about how a brain that broken affects impulse control, aggression, paranoia, and decision-making. In the end, none of that changed the verdict. Aaron Hernandez died by suicide in prison in 2017, ending a story that still feels impossible. A superstar on a Super Bowl contender, living a secret life that ended in life without parole. Nothing in NFL history compares. Ray Caruth, 18 to 24 years. Ray Caruth's crime is one of the coldest, most calculated acts ever committed by an NFL player. Not a moment of rage, not an accident, but a premeditated attempt to erase responsibility by erasing a life. Caruth was a first-round pick for the Carolina Panthers in 1997. Tall, smooth, explosive, a receiver with real upside. But behind that athletic profile was a man who couldn't accept consequences, especially when his image or finances were involved. In 1999, Caruth's girlfriend, Cherika Adams, was 8 months pregnant with his child. She wasn't threatening him. She wasn't blackmailing him. She simply wanted him to be in the baby's life. Caruth wanted the opposite. Investigators later testified that Caruth feared child support, feared commitment, and feared losing control. Instead of facing fatherhood, he made a decision that still horrifies anyone who hears the details. On November 16, 1999, Caruth orchestrated a setup. He drove one car. Cherika drove behind him. A hired gunman, Van Brett Watkins, followed her in another vehicle. Carruth slowed down, trapping Chirica between their cars. Watkins pulled alongside her window and fired 4 bullets into her. And what did Carruth do? He drove away. Chirica survived long enough to call 911. She gave the police Carruth's name. She explained the setup. She begged for her baby to be saved. Doctors performed an emergency C-section. Her son, Chancellor Lee Adams, survived, but the lack of oxygen caused permanent brain damage and cerebral palsy. Chirica died 28 days later. Carruth didn't turn himself in. He fled, found days later hiding in the trunk of a car in Tennessee with cash, candy bars, and a cell phone. Not exactly the behavior of an innocent man. At trial, Watkins, the shooter, testified Carruth hired him. The state couldn't prove first-degree murder beyond a reasonable doubt, but the jury convicted Carruth of conspiracy to commit murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. Sentence: 18 to 24 years. He served 19 years, entering prison at 25 and walking out at 44. Carruth has since made attempts to reframe himself as remorseful, even trying to contact Chancellor, the son he effectively tried to have killed. Chancellor's grandmother, who raised him, declined the offer, publicly, directly, firmly. Today, Chancellor is alive, thriving, and loved, proof that Carruth failed at the one thing he set out to do. Ray Carruth wasn't a tragic figure. He wasn't a man who snapped. He was a man who planned a murder to avoid becoming a father. He deserved every year he served. Henry Ruggs III, 3 to 10 years. Henry Ruggs wasn't given a life sentence, but the crime he committed destroyed a life, ended a young woman's future, killed her dog, devastated a family, and left a permanent scar on the NFL. And the reason he belongs on this list is simple. He should have gotten decades. He got 10 years max. It's one of the most controversial sentences ever handed to an active NFL player. On November 2nd, 2021, Ruggs, then a 22-year-old wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders, got behind the wheel of his Corvette after drinking heavily at a Topgolf. He wasn't buzzed. He wasn't maybe over the limit. He was more than twice the legal limit, and he was driving like he had a death wish. Multiple videos and data points confirmed the same thing. Ruggs drove 156 miles per hour seconds before impact. He hit 127 miles per hour at the moment of collision. His girlfriend was in the passenger seat screaming for him to slow down. He ignored her. He ignored the road. He ignored reality. Then came the impact. He slammed into the back of a Toyota RAV4 driven by 23-year-old Tina Tinter. Tina was alive. Her dog was alive. But the fire from the crash grew too fast. Tina screamed for help. Witnesses tried. They couldn't get the doors open. She burned to death in the vehicle before first responders could reach her. Ruggs survived. The video of him on the pavement afterward, sobbing, injured, crying out in pain, only enraged people more. Because while he was injured, he was alive. Tina wasn't. The charges hit immediately. DUI causing death. Reckless driving causing substantial bodily harm. Additional misdemeanors. Ruggs had a chance to face 50 years. Prosecutors had him dead to rights. Speed, alcohol, witnesses, data, carnage, everything lined up. Instead, he negotiated a plea deal. His charges were reduced to DUI resulting in death, 1 count of misdemeanor vehicular manslaughter. The result? 3 to 10 years in prison. Eligible for parole in his early 30s, young enough to restart his life. Public outrage was immediate and justified. How do you kill a woman at 127 miles per hour, drunk, with your girlfriend in the car, with video evidence, with witnesses, and walk away with a maximum of 10 years? Because the Tinter family agreed to the plea. They didn't want a long, dragged-out trial. They didn't want the trauma. They wanted closure. And they got it, but at a cost that angered millions. Ruggs apologized in court. He'll serve several years. He'll likely get out early. He'll live a full life. Tina Tinter won't. Henry Ruggs didn't receive a life sentence from the judge, but he received something else. A place in NFL infamy, as the player whose recklessness erased an innocent life and walked away with a sentence far too light for what he did. Chad Wheeler, pending severe prison expected. Chad Wheeler didn't receive a life sentence, not yet, but what he did was so violent, so intentional, and so terrifying that he instantly became one of the most hated figures to ever touch an NFL field. His case isn't about accident or negligence. It's about rage, control, and attempted murder. Wheeler was a backup offensive tackle for the Seattle Seahawks. Nobody knew his name. Nobody cared about his career. That changed forever in January 2021, not because of football, but because of brutality. According to police reports, Wheeler attacked his girlfriend, Aaliyah Taylor, in their home. The details are not speculation. They are documented. Here's what investigators found and what Taylor testified to. Wheeler allegedly demanded she bow to him. When she refused, he attacked her. He choked her, threw her onto a bed, and strangled her until she lost consciousness. He believed she was dead. He left the room, ate food, and when she regained consciousness and gasped for air, he reportedly said, "Wow, you're alive?" This wasn't a dispute. This wasn't domestic violence. This was intent to kill. Taylor suffered a fractured humerus, a dislocated elbow, multiple contusions, strangulation injuries, possibly permanent nerve damage. The 911 call came from Taylor after she locked herself in a bathroom while Wheeler tried to break the door down. This case was so graphic that teammates, coaches, and even franchise ownership issued immediate statements. The Seahawks cut Wheeler the next day. His NFL career died instantly, and deservedly. Wheeler was arrested, charged with first-degree domestic violence assault, domestic violence unlawful imprisonment, resisting arrest. These charges carry the possibility of 10+ years, even decades, depending on the sentencing structure and enhancements. Wheeler has claimed mental health struggles contributed to the incident, specifically a bipolar episode. But the brutality, the strangulation, the lack of remorse, the "you're alive" comment, none of that can be explained away by diagnosis alone. As of now, Wheeler was found guilty on 2 counts, including first-degree assault. Wheeler was sentenced to 81 months, 6 years, 9 months in prison. With enhancements and future hearings, more time could still be on the table. No matter what final number ends up on the sentencing sheet, Wheeler's place in football history is locked. He committed one of the most violent acts ever associated with an active NFL player. He didn't snap. He didn't lose control for a moment. He tried to kill someone he claimed to love, and was shocked she survived. That's why his case belongs in the same conversation as the darkest stories in league history. Eric Naposki, life without parole. Eric Naposki's case is one of the most cold-blooded, financially motivated murders ever tied to an NFL player. And unlike some of the other cases on this list, this one wasn't impulsive, emotional, or chaotic. Prosecutors say it was calculated, planned, executed with patience, and fueled entirely by money. Naposki played linebacker briefly in the NFL and had a longer career in Europe. After football, he moved to Orange County, one of the richest areas in the country, where he worked as a nightclub security guard. That's where everything went wrong. In the early 1990s, Naposki began a relationship with a woman named Nanette Johnston, a glamorous, manipulative figure who was already dating William McLaughlin, a millionaire twice her age. McLaughlin was successful, generous, and trusted Nanette completely. Nanette, meanwhile, was quietly forging his checks, accessing his accounts, and siphoning money. But as long as McLaughlin lived, that arrangement had an expiration date. He would eventually find out, and she would lose control. So prosecutors say Nanette and Naposki came up with a solution: kill McLaughlin, collect the inheritance, start a new life. On December 15, 1994, someone entered McLaughlin's waterfront home and shot him 6 times with a 9mm handgun. There were no signs of struggle, no forced entry, no robbery. This wasn't a random crime, it was an execution. Suspicion immediately fell on Nanette. She had access. She forged checks. She was living a double life. But police couldn't tie the trigger to Naposki. Not yet. For years, the case went cold. Then, forensic technology caught up. A witness remembered Naposki asking where to buy 9mm ammunition. A timeline proved he lied about where he was during the murder. Phone records and physical proximity placed him near the scene. Nanette's financial motive became impossible to ignore. The case reopened in 2009, 15 years after the murder. In 2011, Naposki was convicted of first-degree murder, murder for financial gain. Sentence: life without the possibility of parole. Nanette was convicted separately and also received a life sentence. Naposki maintains his innocence to this day. The courts don't care. The evidence convinced a jury that he was the hitman in a murder-for-money plot, one of the most chilling domestic homicide cases in football history. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a moment of panic. This was a planned killing for profit. And that's why Eric Naposki is one of the few former NFL players serving true life, with no chance of ever walking free again. Anthony Wayne Smith, 3 consecutive life sentences. Anthony Wayne Smith is the closest thing the NFL has ever produced to a serial killer. A man whose crimes were so brutal, so bizarre, and so methodically violent that even prosecutors struggled to understand how someone could live 2 lives at once. One as a former professional athlete, and one as a remorseless predator. Smith was a defensive end for the Los Angeles Raiders from 1991 to 1997. He wasn't a star, but he was a solid rotational player. Strong, intimidating, talented enough to carve out 7 years in the league. When his career ended, nobody expected anything unusual. Then the truth started unraveling. Smith was first charged in 2011 with the 2008 kidnapping and murder of a man named Maurice Mo Jones. Prosecutors alleged Smith posed as a police officer, abducted Jones, burned him with a blowtorch, beat him, tortured him, and executed him. That wasn't speculation. It was documented in the autopsy. But during the investigation, something horrifying happened. Smith was linked to 3 more murders. All unsolved, all disturbingly similar. Murder number 1, 1999, Kevin and Ricky Nettles, 2 brothers who owned a car wash. They were abducted by men posing as cops. Witnesses said the fake officers looked like professional athletes. Both brothers were tortured and killed. Murder number 2, 2001, Dennis Henderson, a mechanic, abducted, beaten, burned with an iron, dumped in the desert. Dead. Murder number 3, 2008, the Maurice Jones killing, the crime that finally led to Smith's arrest and opened the door to the others. During his trial, prosecutors presented a chilling pattern. Smith impersonated police officers. He abducted his victims. He used torture, blowtorches, irons, beatings. He had financial motives in some cases, personal motives in others. The killings were calculated, not impulsive. Smith denied everything. He claimed he was framed. Juries didn't believe him. In 2015, Smith was convicted of the 1999 Nettles brothers double homicide, the 2001 Henderson murder, the 2008 Jones murder. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Not concurrent, not overlapping, consecutive. Meaning even if he lived 300 years, he would never leave a prison cell. Smith's case is the darkest on this entire list because it doesn't involve one tragedy or one moment of violence. It involves multiple victims spread over nearly a decade, with a level of cruelty not commonly seen in professional sports history. This wasn't a fall from grace. This was a man who lived 2 lives, and in the shadows, he was a monster. Robert Rozier, life sentence, Black Mafia cult murders. Robert Rozier's story is one of the most disturbing intersections between professional sports and violent crime. Because unlike nearly every other name on this list, Rozier wasn't triggered by money, ego, domestic rage, or a moment of panic. His crimes were ideological, fanatical, cult-driven. Rozier was a defensive end who briefly played for the St. Louis Cardinals in 1979. His NFL career lasted 6 games. Forgettable, uneventful, completely ordinary. But once the league cut him, his life spiraled into something nightmarish. In the early 1980s, Rozier was recruited into a violent cult led by Yahweh Ben Yahweh, the leader of a black supremacist religious sect called the Nation of Yahweh. Outwardly, the group preached empowerment and community. Privately, Yahweh ran a brutal organization that demanded absolute loyalty and violent enforcement. Rozier became one of Yahweh's death angels, a group of followers tasked with carrying out assassinations, revenge killings, and targeted executions of people the cult deemed enemies or white devils. What Rozier later admitted in court is horrifying. He murdered 7 people at the direction of the cult. He cut off ears of victims as proof of completion. He claimed he was earning his white robe, a twisted cult requirement. He believed killing was an act of religious obedience. This wasn't gang violence. This wasn't emotion. It was ritualistic murder for ideological approval. When authorities finally dismantled the cult's operations, Rozier flipped. He became the star witness for the prosecution in the case against Yahweh Ben Yahweh and the organization's leadership. His testimony was devastating and helped secure their convictions. Because he cooperated, Rozier received a deal: plead guilty to 4 murders, serve 22 years, enter federal witness protection after release. But Rozier couldn't stay clean. After serving around 12 years, he was released early under protection. He changed his name. He relocated. He had the chance at a second life. He blew it. In 1999, Rozier was arrested again, this time for passing bad checks in California. Because of the state's 3 strikes law, his prior murders counted as violent felonies. The judge had no choice. Life in prison. No parole. No deal this time. No new identity to save him. Rozier is now serving a life sentence at Mule Creek State Prison. His story stands apart from every other case on this list. A pro athlete turned cult assassin. Ritual killings instead of emotional violence. A life sentence not for the original murders, but because he violated witness protection terms. Robert Rozier isn't infamous because of football. He's infamous because he became a willing weapon for a homicidal cult, and the justice system gave him one chance to walk away from it, and he couldn't. Daryl Henley, 41 years, drug trafficking plus murder for hire plot. Daryl Henley's story is not just criminal, it's shocking because of how far it spiraled. He didn't just commit crimes, he escalated them, he compounded them, and he crossed a line almost no NFL player has ever crossed. He tried to have a federal judge and a witness murdered. Henley was a talented cornerback for the Los Angeles Rams in the early 1990s. Fast, instinctive, respected, a starter with real upside. But off the field, he built a second life tied to cocaine trafficking, drug connections, and a desire for fast money that eventually swallowed him whole. Phase 1, the cocaine operation. In 1993, Henley got caught up in a major drug trafficking investigation. According to the prosecution, Henley helped move significant amounts of cocaine through California, using his NFL money and connections to grease the wheels of the operation. In 1994, he was convicted of conspiracy to distribute cocaine, possession with intent to distribute, a series of trafficking-related charges. He received a 6-year federal sentence. That should have been the end of it, but Henley wasn't done ruining his life. Phase 2, the murder for hire plot. While awaiting sentencing, before he even went to prison, Henley did the unimaginable. He contacted a known drug trafficker named Eugene Nick Davis, who was also under federal investigation. Henley asked him to arrange hits on the federal judge presiding over his case, the key witness who testified against him. This wasn't rumor or hearsay. The conversations were recorded by undercover agents. Henley discussed payment, logistics, motivations, how he wanted the murders carried out. He did this while already entangled in the justice system. He did this while knowing he was being watched. He did this with the confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. The FBI set up a sting. Davis turned informant. Henley's plan collapsed. This time, the charges included conspiracy to murder a federal judge, conspiracy to murder a federal witness, retaliation against witnesses, additional drug offenses. When the verdict came down, the sentence was crushing, an additional 21 years, on top of the original 6. Total, 27 years federal time, to be served consecutively. But because of mandatory sentencing structures, enhancements, and parole rules, Henley's time ballooned to effectively 41 years. NFL players have committed murder. NFL players have trafficked drugs. But Henley is one of the only players in league history who engaged in drug trafficking, got convicted, and then tried to eliminate the judge and witness prosecuting him. This was not panic. It was calculated survival instinct, executed with stunning recklessness. Darrell Henley went from starting NFL cornerback to drug trafficker to would-be assassin to one of the longest federal sentences ever given to an NFL player. His story is a case study in how deep criminal thinking can run and how far someone can fall when they'd rather kill the justice system than accept accountability. Lawrence Phillips, approximately 31 years, died in prison. Lawrence Phillips is one of the darkest what-if stories in football history, a player with Hall of Fame talent and a criminal record so violent, so relentless, and so self-destructive that it ultimately cost him his life. No one on this list had a longer pattern of violence across more victims than Phillips. If Aaron Hernandez is the most infamous case, Phillips is the most predictable. His trajectory didn't shock anyone. It horrified them because people saw the crash coming. At Nebraska, Phillips was a generational running back. Explosive, powerful, unstoppable. Tom Osborne built an entire offense around him. He was the best player on back-to-back national championship teams. But while he dominated on the field, he was unraveling off it. The first major red flag came in 1995 when Phillips broke into his ex-girlfriend Kate McEwen's apartment, dragged her down a flight of stairs, choked her, slammed her head into a mailbox. Witnesses saw everything. Nebraska suspended him, then reinstated him in the same season because they needed him for a title run. That decision aged horribly. Despite multiple violent incidents, the Rams took Phillips 6th overall in the 1996 NFL Draft. He rewarded them with inconsistent play, fights, missed practices, assault allegations, violent outbursts. Dick Vermeil finally cut him, something Vermeil almost never did. He bounced through Miami, San Francisco, and NFL Europe, leaving chaos in every locker room. After football, Phillips's life spiraled into criminal freefall. 2005, Saudi incident, assault. He drove his car into 3 teenagers after an argument in a pickup football game. Not an accident. Not a panic. Witnesses said he aimed for them. 2006, kidnapping and domestic violence. He held his girlfriend hostage for hours, choking and beating her. 2008, conviction. Phillips was sentenced to more than 10 years for the hit-and-run incident. 2009, another trial. He was sentenced to an additional 25 years for false imprisonment and domestic violence. Total sentence, 31 years minimum. Phillips would not be eligible for parole until his 60s. But the story wasn't over. In 2015, while in Kern Valley State Prison, Phillips was accused of murdering his cellmate Damian Soward, a known gang member. Soward was strangled to death in the cell. Phillips was the only other person inside. He was charged with murder and faced another life sentence, but he never made it to trial. January 13th, 2016, Phillips was found dead in his cell. The ruling, suicide. He was 40. Whether it was guilt, hopelessness, paranoia, or violent prison politics, we'll never know. What we do know is that Lawrence Phillips's life was a long pattern of violence, denied accountability, and wasted potential. No one on this list had a fall as slow, as predictable, or as deadly. Phillips didn't just throw his career away. He left a trail of victims, trauma, and destruction behind him until the cycle finally consumed him too. Sierre Wood, life sentence, death of a 5-year-old. Sierre Wood's case is one of the hardest to process, not because it's complicated, but because it's simple, brutal, and impossible to excuse. This wasn't a moment of panic or a split-second mistake. A child suffered, a child begged, and a child died. Wood was a former Notre Dame standout running back who bounced around NFL practice squads with the Texans, Bills, Patriots, and Raiders. His career never took off, but he wasn't known as a problem. He was quiet, low profile, forgettable on the field. Then 2019 happened, and everything changed. The victim, Lorraine Gage, 5 years old. Wood was living in Las Vegas with his girlfriend Amy Taylor and her daughter Lorraine Gage. The child had no history of violence, no behavioral problems, nothing that justified discipline, let alone torture. Yet investigators found injuries all over her body, bruises, burns, internal trauma, evidence of repeated physical punishment, the kind that no active, healthy child could possibly cause to herself. What Wood told police made it worse. He claimed she died during exercise punishment. The drills. According to prosecutors, Wood forced the 5-year-old to run wind sprints inside their apartment, jumping jacks, sit-ups, squats, not for fitness, for punishment. This wasn't coaching, it was cruelty disguised as discipline. When the child collapsed, Wood delayed calling 911. When paramedics arrived, they found her unresponsive. Doctors later said the internal injuries were consistent with severe blunt force trauma, not simple exercise. She died shortly after. The state argued this was intentional abuse, not misguided training. Wood delivered repeated blows. He imposed extreme workouts as punishment. He ignored signs of distress. He failed to seek immediate help. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern of torture. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Wood took a plea deal in 2024. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Wood received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum term. His girlfriend also faced charges for failing to protect her child. Wood will likely spend decades behind bars, and many believe that's still too lenient considering the nature of the crime. Most players on this list committed premeditated murder, gang-related killings, domestic violence, contract killings. Wood's case is darker in a different way. His victim was a defenseless 5-year-old child. The suffering was prolonged, and the reason was discipline. Sierre Wood went from NFL running back to child killer to a man serving a life sentence that will likely define him until the day he dies. Keith Wright, 234 years. Keith Wright's case isn't just severe, it is one of the longest prison sentences ever handed down to a former NFL player. And unlike most names on this list, Wright didn't commit one horrific crime. He committed many, repeatedly, methodically, with escalating violence. Wright was a former defensive lineman drafted by the Houston Texans in 2003. He bounced around the league for a few years. Colts, Bucks, Lions, Cardinals, but his NFL career never stuck. Once the check stopped, his life spiraled in a way almost no one could have predicted. By 2011, Wright wasn't just struggling, he was terrorizing his community. Wright was convicted of multiple home invasions in Sacramento, California. These weren't simple burglaries, they were violent, terrifying attacks involving kidnapping, armed robbery, sexual assault, false imprisonment, burglary, assault with a firearm. He broke into homes with victims inside. He held people at gunpoint. He tied them up. He threatened them. He sexually assaulted women during the robberies. These weren't crimes committed during a moment of rage or desperation. They were planned, executed with confidence, and repeated again and again. Multiple victims described the same pattern. Wright entered late at night. He overwhelmed victims with threats and weapons. He forced them to hand over valuables. In several cases, he sexually assaulted the women while their children were in the home. This was predatory behavior, with no ambiguity. Wright was eventually tracked down using DNA evidence and stolen property linking him to multiple crime scenes. Once investigators connected all the cases, the full picture came into focus. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a full-blown crime spree across multiple neighborhoods. He was charged with 19 different felonies, and the court system threw the entire book at him. When the judge read the sentence, it stunned even the courtroom. 234 years to life in prison. No parole, no reduction, no second chance. This is the kind of sentence usually reserved for serial rapists, serial kidnappers, or repeat violent predators, because that's exactly what Wright had become. He will die in prison. Rashee Rice, facing years in prison. Rashee Rice is the only active NFL starter on this list, and his case isn't finished yet. But the facts already on record are so bad, so reckless, and so undeniable that he's staring down a future that looks a lot more like a prison cell than an NFL locker room. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fender bender. This was pure, deliberate recklessness that killed an innocent man and injured multiple others. And the evidence is brutal. On March 30th, 2024, Rice was driving a Lamborghini Urus on a Dallas highway. Not cruising, not late. He was racing. The data log showed 119 miles per hour seconds before impact. Over 100 miles per hour at the moment he lost control. Weaving through traffic. Aggressive lane changes. Racing a Corvette Z06 driven by his teammate. Then it happened. Rice lost control of the Lamborghini, caused a multi-vehicle chain reaction crash, and fled the scene on foot, leaving the wrecked cars and injured people behind. One victim, 25-year-old Kason Furlow, later died from his injuries. This was no accident. This was the predictable outcome of street racing a supercar through normal traffic. Dallas PD collected traffic camera footage, highway surveillance, witness videos, cell phone data, black box ECM speed data, physical evidence at the scene. It all pointed to the same reality. Rice caused the crash. Rice fled the scene. And Rice was driving at criminal speeds. He eventually turned himself in, after securing lawyers first. Police charged Rice with 1 count of manslaughter, 6 counts of collision involving injury, 1 count of collision involving death, 1 count of aggravated assault, multiple reckless driving charges. Manslaughter in Texas carries up to 20 years. Mandatory minimums in some circumstances, and fleeing the scene of a fatal crash, that alone can be 5 to 10 years. Stacking is absolutely on the table. Prosecutors have emphasized extreme speed, street racing, leaving injured victims behind, death of an innocent man, multiple other victims harmed, prior behavioral warnings from Rice. This isn't a case where remorse buys leniency. This is a case where the public wants accountability, and courts almost always hammer athletes in these situations because it's preventable arrogant behavior. Rice was rising. A second-round pick, Mahomes' emerging WR1, a future star. Now, possible multi-year suspension, Chiefs likely to move on, career in jeopardy, legal bills exploding, public image destroyed. His career is collapsing in real time. Here's the honest projection. Manslaughter, 8 to 20 years. Leaving the scene, 5 to 10 years. Injury collisions, 2 to 5 years each. If stacked, he could realistically see 20 to 40 years. If run concurrently with a plea, likely 10 to 15 years. Either way, Rashee Rice is not walking away from this. A young man died. Multiple people were injured. And Rice chose to race a supercar through traffic like a teenager in a Fast and Furious fanfic. He will serve real time. Years, not months. And the moment he walked away from the wreck without checking on the victims, his NFL career effectively ended. Rafael Cherry, life sentence, later reduced, paroled in 2023. Rafael Cherry's case is one of the least known on this list, but the crime is as cold and devastating as anything tied to a former NFL player. Unlike the more chaotic, rage-driven cases you've heard of, this one was rooted in domestic violence, the kind that builds over years and ends in tragedy. Cherry was a defensive back drafted by Washington in 1984. He played 2 seasons in the NFL. Nothing spectacular, nothing dramatic. Most fans barely remember him. But his name resurfaced in 2010 for a reason nobody could ignore. Cherry was married to Jelena Cherry, a Belarusian immigrant. Their relationship was volatile. Friends and neighbors told investigators they'd seen loud arguments, controlling behavior, emotional abuse, signs the marriage was unraveling. But domestic issues often happen behind closed doors, and this was no different, until the day it turned violent. On February 21, 2010, police in Los Angeles responded to a call from Cherry's home. They found Jelena dead, not injured, not dying, already dead. The autopsy ruled the cause of death as strangulation, consistent with being choked to death manually. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment push. It wasn't accidental. It required force, time, intent, and direct physical control. Cherry denied killing her. He said they had argued, but she fell and hit her head. The evidence disagreed. Bruising around her neck, hemorrhaging in throat tissues, physical signs consistent with manual strangulation, no head trauma to support his story. Investigators believe Cherry strangled her during an argument and then lied about it. Prosecutors charged Cherry with second-degree murder, intentional killing during domestic dispute. He was convicted in 2011. The judge handed down a life sentence, one of the harshest possible outcomes for second-degree murder under California law. Cherry's attorneys appealed repeatedly, but the conviction held. In later appeals, the court reduced his sentence to a fixed-term period. After serving more than a decade, Cherry appeared before a parole board. Despite the brutality of the murder and objections from Jelena's family, Cherry was granted parole. He was released in 2023. One of the few men on this list who walked out of prison alive. Justin Bannon, 16 years. His downfall came from paranoia, delusion, and a mental spiral so severe that it ended with him shooting an innocent woman for no reason at all. But the outcome is the same, a long prison sentence, and one of the most unsettling criminal cases involving a former NFL player. Bannon had a long NFL career, 12 seasons, 5 teams, over 100 games played, a respected, dependable defensive tackle. He was known for intelligence, professionalism, and being a good teammate. No violence, no red flags, no off-field issues. Then, his life fell apart. In Boulder, Colorado, Bannon entered an acupuncture studio, a building he had no connection to, carrying a loaded handgun, a tactical vest, multiple magazines, a wallet full of cash. According to police reports and courtroom testimony, Bannon believed he was being followed by the Russian mafia. He claimed a tracking chip had been implanted in his body. He thought people were trying to kill him. These weren't excuses he made up later. He told officers the same thing during the arrest. Inside the building, Bannon encountered a 32-year-old woman. He pulled the gun. He fired. The bullet struck her in the shoulder, narrowly missing major arteries. She survived, but the physical and psychological scars remain. She did nothing to provoke him. She didn't know him. She was simply standing in the hallway when a former NFL lineman, gripped by psychosis, decided she was part of a conspiracy that didn't exist. Police found the gun, extra magazines, Bannon's claims about being hunted, his admission that he'd been using alcohol to calm the paranoia, evidence that he had been struggling mentally for months. But mental deterioration doesn't erase responsibility. Bannon's attorney argued he suffered from CTE-related paranoia. He was mentally impaired during the shooting. The NFL failed to protect his brain. But prosecutors countered with, he walked into a building armed. He pulled the trigger voluntarily. He carried high-capacity magazines. He didn't call police or seek help. He shot a completely innocent person. Intent wasn't required, only the act. A jury found him guilty of attempted murder and related charges. In 2022, Bannon was sentenced to 16 years in state prison, not because he was evil, not because he was violent by nature, but because he was dangerous, and because his delusions nearly killed someone who had nothing to do with him. Bannon claims he doesn't remember the shooting. Doctors have since evaluated him for possible CTE. His behavior before the incident strongly suggests brain damage played a role. But here's the painful truth. A woman was shot. A life was permanently altered. A crime was committed. And the court had no choice. Mental decline doesn't wipe away consequences. Justin Bannon went from a respected NFL veteran to a man who mistook a random woman for an assassin and pulled the trigger. This case isn't just criminal. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when brain trauma, paranoia, and access to weapons collide. O.J. Simpson, 9 to 33 years. O.J. Simpson is the most infamous name on this entire list, but not for the crime he actually went to prison for. His case is complicated, polarizing, and unlike any other NFL-related criminal story in history. You already know why he's famous. What you may not know, or what people often forget, is that O.J.'s actual prison sentence had nothing to do with the 1994 murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. He was acquitted in that case. Correct or not, that's the legal reality. The sentence he did receive, 9 to 33 years, came from something totally different, an armed robbery and kidnapping in Las Vegas. This case is a bizarre end to one of the strangest American stories ever told. On September 13, 2007, O.J. Simpson and a group of men burst into a hotel room at the Palace Station Casino in Las Vegas. Inside were two sports memorabilia dealers. Simpson believed they were trying to sell items that had been stolen from him years earlier, items he claimed were rightfully his. Here's where everything went to hell. The men with Simpson were armed. The dealers were held at gunpoint. The confrontation turned into kidnapping under Nevada law. Everything was recorded on audio. Simpson insisted he was just reclaiming his own property. The court didn't care. What mattered was, guns were present.
People were blocked from leaving.
Threats were made. The situation met the legal definition of kidnapping plus armed robbery. This was not a sympathetic misunderstanding. It was an armed invasion of a hotel room by a man with a documented violent past. Simpson faced kidnapping, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy charges, coercion, burglary. His co-defendants flipped on him. The recordings were devastating. The jury needed only a few hours. Simpson was found guilty on all 12 counts. And here's the part everyone talks about. The sentence was brutally long, 33 years max with parole eligibility after 9. People believe it was payback for the murder trial. Legally, it wasn't. Realistically, of course it was. No court will ever admit it, but everyone knows the truth. O.J. went to prison in 2008. He served 9 years at Lovelock Correctional Center. In 2017, a parole board unanimously approved his release. He walked out at age 70. He remained on parole until 2021. He died in 2024. To this day, his Las Vegas sentence remains one of the most aggressively long penalties for a robbery case of that type. A sentence handed to a man who beat double homicide charges on national TV. He didn't get life in prison, but he got life in public infamy, and every step he took after 1994 made it worse. O.J. Simpson isn't the darkest criminal on this list, but he is the most unforgettable.
If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.